This was only a few months ago. I was spending the weekend cozying up inside, as it was the end of winter and these were the last few days of cold before it was supposed to start heating up. This night, it was rainy and cold, so I had nothing better to do than watch some movies and relax. But it was sometime not too long after dinner that there was a knock at the door. I got up and walked over, but looking out the peephole, I didn't recognize the man. He was wearing some brown jacket and a beanie, and he was holding a snow shovel. Seeing as there wasn't any snow on the ground, I didn't understand what he was here for. I cracked the door just an inch and asked what he wanted. It took all but 5 seconds of listening to him to know he was up to no good. He stumbled over his words and was trying to tell me a whole story about how he was just a friendly guy looking for any jobs to do in my yard. Something felt off about it and unnatural, so I said no thanks and started shutting the door, but the guy quickly put his hand on it. For a second, he just stared at me, keeping the door open, before he let go. I shut and locked it, and after processing what happened, I looked back out the window. He walked down to the sidewalk and disappeared in the rainy fog. I watched for another minute to make sure he'd actually left for good, then I went back to my movie. The guy was definitely sketchy, but I didn't think he would come back or anything, and would probably just go on to the next house. The rain had picked up over the next hour. I was still in the living room and had started another movie, although I knew I was probably too tired to finish it. My eyes were drifting in and out, but randomly, there was a thump above me that shook me awake. It was just one thump, and was kind of hard to tell how loud it actually was with the rain outside, but what was odd about it was that it was definitely from above me. I got up and walked upstairs, looking for anything fallen over, or even a leak in the ceiling that might have made the house settle a bit. However, I found nothing. It could have been one of the gutters clicking out of place from the heavy rain, or really anything else, so I ignored it. I went back downstairs, and being more awake now, I decided to finish the rest of the movie. By the time I'd finished it and was ready to go to bed, it was nearly 12 a.m. I shut off the TV and went around turning off all the lights downstairs. But as I was walking upstairs to go to bed, I could very quickly feel the temperature drop as I got closer to the top of the steps. Maybe I was too tired to give it much thought, but when I got upstairs and started closing each of the doors that I'd opened earlier, I noticed something from the corner of one of the rooms. The window was cracked open. I must have stared at it for a whole 10 seconds, thinking how impossible that was, and just being extremely confused. I walked over and looked at it closer. It was one of the windows that had a small roof overhang under it, and before I closed it, I barely could see an imprint on the windowsill of what looked like a shoe. I could feel the blood rush from my face as I turned around and just listened for a moment. The low creaking of the house, combined with the rain speckling the roof, only made me more unnerved, knowing someone was in my house right now. I began slowly walking as quietly as I could back into the hallway. All the other doors were still open, making me feel like someone's eyes could be watching me right now through one of the doorways. I was able to make it downstairs though, and from there I got my phone and hid in the garage, calling 911. It took 5 minutes for the first officer to arrive. I heard nothing but the rain during that time. Once I let the officer in, I waited on my porch as he searched the home. About 2 minutes later, I heard him call out upstairs, and then he came down, holding a guy in handcuffs. I quickly recognized him as the man who showed up on my doorstep earlier in the night. and he had a terrible look of anger as he passed by me and was thrown in the car. Putting all the pieces together, the guy had climbed up onto my roof, which was likely the cause of the thump I heard hours ago. Then he got in through the second-story window, which I never had thought to even lock. Most disturbing, though, is that the officer said he was hiding in the master bedroom, which I was literally 30 seconds from entering and maybe even falling asleep without any idea he was in there. The guy even took his shoes off after climbing in the window to not let his shoe prints show on the carpet. So the fact that I saw the tiny imprint on the windowsill is a miracle. With him going directly to my bedroom, his intentions were clearly malicious, and thankfully the judge agreed. It's only been a few months since, but I still have sleepless nights where I can't help but feel like someone is hiding inside my home in the middle of the night. A couple years ago, I applied for a temporary job at a local gas station. I was planning to move in 6 months, so I couldn't get anything too permanent, but I still needed to make some cash beforehand. This job paid well, enough to convince me to work the job opening they had for the overnight shift. I would just stay by the register and occasionally do regular maintenance work. This was during my 4th month working there. At some point during this time, I became familiar with a customer that came in pretty frequently. Almost every night, around 1 or 2 a.m., this guy would walk in and buy random different things. Sometimes it was household items, or food, or tools. I always thought it was weird because he'd come in every night to buy a couple things that would be way cheaper and easier to get at any regular grocery store. He didn't talk much either. All I knew was that his name was Dave, and he drove an old red Chevy sedan. He looked like he was maybe 40 to 45 years old. Anyway, one night at the usual 1 a.m. time, Dave pulled into the gas station. No other customers were here. It was just me sitting in the corner waiting out the time. When Dave walked in, though, there was something different about him. He was dripping in sweat, and he was rushing through the aisles, searching for something specific. When he finally found what he was looking for, he hurried up to the counter and tossed it down for me to ring up. It was a master lock, like one for locking up a bicycle. I really didn't feel like it was appropriate for me to question him, but with the guy sweating and being in a rush, I just felt a little off about this. "It's good to see you again, Dave. You just get a new bike?" I asked in a friendly manner, hoping it would come off as just casual conversation. He didn't even look at me. Instead, he fumbled around for his wallet and started yanking out cash in a hurry. I left it at that and just rang him up, then watched him rush into his car and pull away. Something was definitely weird. But hey, maybe he just got a new bicycle and had been riding it around for a couple hours and needed to get back to wherever he parked it so he could lock it up before it was stolen. Maybe that's a stretch, but it was the best I could come up with. The rest of the night passed by, and so did several more days. I didn't see him for almost a whole week, which was odd considering he usually came in every night. It wasn't until my Wednesday shift that I saw him again. It was drizzling outside, so the first several hours went by really slow. I was leaning back in my chair and looking out the window at the rain coming down when his red car pulled into the parking lot. As soon as he parked, he got out and rushed inside. I greeted him as he entered, but he ignored me. He hurried through the aisles and was talking under his breath. I couldn't hear what he was saying, but he sounded frustrated, and I got really uncomfortable, like my gut was telling me something was wrong. Then I heard a thud. My eyes shifted to the window, looking at the direction it came from, and the only thing there was Dave's car. It was a loud thud, too, like someone kicking the inside of the door. After a second, I looked back at Dave. He wasn't rushing anymore. He was standing in the aisle, staring directly at me, as if I'd just discovered something that I shouldn't have. There was another thud, but my eyes were fixed on Dave as I could feel panic rushing through my body. Then he quickly looked away and hurried out the door. I was still stunned, but managed to get my phone out and snap a picture of his license plate as he drove away. I called the police immediately. That night felt extremely long as I waited for any updates from them, and it wasn't until I got home around 6 a.m. that I received a call from the police. They found the guy from the license plate I gave them, and they found a woman that he had kidnapped. Apparently, he had just moved into a new small cabin on the edge of town less than a week ago, and he had no registered prior address, so they had no way to know what he'd been up to before this incident. Luckily, they saved this woman before she was harmed, though. Also, it turned out Dave wasn't his real name, which isn't surprising, but at least he's locked up for good now. I was 14 when this happened, and this was over spring break. My parents' anniversary happened to be during this week, so they went on a date night a few hours north and were staying in a hotel. Having the house to myself for once, I invited one of my friends, Justin, to stay the night. He brought a ton of snacks and sodas, which we set up on the table in the basement and fired up the PlayStation. We had the speakers up pretty loud, and were gaming down there for 3 hours straight. Eventually though, Justin went upstairs to get a glass of water, and when he came back down, he looked worried. I asked what was up, and he said there was someone outside the house. By the kitchen, we had a large sliding glass door, and I guess he saw a person standing in our backyard. I thought he was trying to play a joke on me, but he was serious. We both went back upstairs and into the kitchen, and at first look, it didn't look like anyone was in the backyard. But then we noticed that there were some smudges on the outside of the door that looked like someone might have been leaning on the glass and looking inside. That's obviously really creepy, so I shut the blinds and we did a quick perimeter check around the other windows. We didn't see anything else, so we figured we were all good. Again, we were both just kids and didn't really know how to handle something like this. After a couple minutes, we went back downstairs and continued where we left off. Another couple hours went by, and it had to be well into the night, like 2 or 3 a.m. Justin was getting tired, so we wrapped up our last match and turned off the PlayStation. The basement had 2 small couches, so we each took one and laid out some blankets, then turned off the lights and called it a night. For some reason, I had trouble falling asleep. Like I would fall asleep for a few minutes and then wake right back up, over and over. I don't know why, possibly from too much caffeine, but it went on for a really long time. It felt like over an hour. But then, one of these times that I woke up, something was different. I opened my eyes. It was pitch black in the whole basement, but there was a tiny streak of light across the other end of the room. I sat up a bit and could tell it was coming from the door above the staircase. I looked over at the other couch, and Justin was still there, sound asleep. Did he get up at some point to get more water? There's no way I wouldn't have noticed. I got up, feeling too uneasy to sleep without making sure this was nothing. I went over to the bottom of the stairs and looked up. The door was cracked open, but not enough to see through. I went to the top and opened it further. The hallway light was on, and so was the kitchen light. It was about then that I remembered about that man that Justin said was standing outside the house, and I walked over to the kitchen to look out the back door. The backyard was empty, and nobody was out there from what I could see. As I was about to look away though, something moved across the reflection on the glass door. I spun around, looking behind me and staring down the hall. Whatever I just saw had quickly moved across the other end of the hallway. I didn't know what to do. I just stood for a second before sprinting back into the basement. I woke up Justin, and after a quick explanation, he was just as terrified as I was. We hid in one of the closets down there and called the police, and while we were waiting, we could hear someone moving around upstairs. It was like they were running around the house looking for something. It got quiet after a few minutes though, and when police showed up, the person was gone. They found that the small bolt that locked the back door was snapped off, so that's how they got in. Other than that, we don't know anything. For several years after this incident though, every few months we would find those same smudges on the back door of someone clearly looking inside. It wasn't until we finally got a security camera that they left us alone, at least as far as we can tell. It's been over a year since we've seen any signs of them. What they wanted is still unknown.
I will start out by saying that I am not a writer by any means. For a bit of backstory, my mom was dating an abusive prick at this time. We will call him Ian. Because of Ian and the crazy fights they had gotten into, we couldn't lock up my house at all. He had kicked in both the front and the back door to the house, and they were never fixed. My mother and Ian were at the bar all day, every day. I told you this so you would know why the house wasn't locked up and where my parents were when this happened. This incident occurred when I was around 12 years old and my little brother around 10. I was a really small girl at this age and my brother was sick all the time, so he was very, very tiny and frail. My mother and Ian were at the bar as usual. When you opened my front door, you're right in the living room and you could see the back door. There was a hallway to the right that led back into the bedrooms, and that is where my brother and I were. We were in his bedroom with the door closed, playing something on PlayStation. It was around midnight or 1 a.m. and we were playing and having a good time when I heard a weird noise. My brother didn't hear it and I didn't want to creep him out. I told him that I wanted to get a drink and I told him to stay in the room and that I would bring him something. To get to my kitchen, you would have to walk down the hallway in front of both the front and back door because it was behind the living room. I kept hearing strange noises, so before I left out of my brother's room, I told him to get into the closet and work on our fort so that it would be ready when I was done getting our drinks and a snack. I raised my little brother for the most part and took care of him. I had a feeling, a terrible sense of dread. I could tell something wasn't right, and this was a way to get my brother to hide without scaring him. He frightened easily and had really bad asthma attacks, and at this time he had no inhaler or his breathing treatment machine for him. I knew if he was having an asthma attack, on top of being scared, it wouldn't be pretty. Anyway, I left the back room and decided to see what was going on. Because I was such a badass at 12 years old, but I had to protect my little brother, I started sneaking up the hallway as slowly and quietly as I could. I was terrified. I could just feel that something was wrong. Before I made it to the end of the hallway, I heard a man. It sounded like he was growling. It was a deep, terrifying noise. I can't explain it, but the feeling that washed over me damn near made me puke. So I of course freeze. I have no one in this town. I don't know anyone, and my dad is living in a different state. My mom is at the bar drunk as hell. I was sitting there trying to gather the courage to see what was around the corner and going over my options when I hear my brother's door open. He sees me and the look on my face and freezes. I remember his eyes going so wide with fear because he must have heard the growl or whatever it was too. I motion him with my hands to go back into the room and he does. I finally gather the courage to peek around the corner, and what I saw still freaks me out to this day. I saw a man probably around 6'6" and 300 plus pounds sitting on my couch with a wicked grin on his face. That grin and the look in his eyes will forever be burned in my head. By some stupid luck, the man didn't see me. I so slowly snuck back to my brother's room. I shut the door and I started going over my options. My brother was already horrified because of the growling noise this man was making. I am so thankful that he wasn't the one who saw what was out there. I mustered my brave big sister face and calmly told him that there was a big man that we didn't know on the couch and that he needed to be very quiet, and I needed him to be brave and keep his breathing in check. My brother adored me and looked up to me, so when I told him that I needed him to be brave, he tried his best. I told him not to move, and he didn't. The first thing I tried was the window, but it wouldn't budge. It was completely stuck. I'm making myself stay calm for my brother's sake, but I know what's sitting out there. So since the window was stuck, I decided to start looking for a weapon. My older brother lived here as well, and I know he had swords somewhere. I don't remember where he was at the time. As I'm looking for the weapon, I hear the man sing, "I know you're here." My stomach knotted up and the hair on the back of my neck raised. I instantly got a cold sweat. And then I hear it. My little brother had started wheezing. Asthma attack. I hugged him and reminded him about being brave and told him to sit still and focus on his breathing. I frantically started trying to get the windows open, but it was stuck. I looked around and started moving blankets when I found my older brother's cell phone that he always forgot. I remember thinking that I was lucky and I felt a bit of relief. I immediately called the police and told them what was going on. Hysterical at this point, but still remaining quiet as possible. The dispatcher told me to remain on the phone so she could hear what was happening when the man started banging on our bedroom door. It had been about 5 minutes into the phone call when this happened, and I could no longer remain calm. I lost it. I started screaming. I mean blood-curdling screaming. The kind of screaming that would send chills down your spine if you heard it. I forgot to mention that our bedroom had only one working lock, so the door was locked, but he was trying to get in and banging on it. His banging got louder and louder, and he was screaming to let him in when it completely went silent. Then he did the creepiest, most terrifying thing ever. He started laughing. "You know I could just bust down this door in about 2 seconds, right, little girl?" he said. Now he's lightly tapping on the door and asking for me to open it. His demeanor completely changed. I then heard a scraping sound at the door. What I had imagined, it was in my 12-year-old head that he was scraping the door with, was his really long fingernails or something, but that wasn't the case. Not too long after, I hear the police start screaming at him to get on the ground and to put his hands up. I hear him putting up a fight, followed by more yelling and eventually silence. After a few minutes, there was a knock on my door, but at this point, I was too terrified to open it. I thought that this nightmare guy was still here, so being in my hysterical state, I started screaming "no, please," over and over again, just sobbing and shaking. I couldn't stay brave for my little brother anymore. I was on the floor holding him this whole time, convinced that we were going to die. Eventually, I calmed myself a bit, and this time, a female officer was at the door, so I opened it. There were about 5 cops standing in the hallway, listening to me being hysterical. I refused to let go of my brother at this point, but we both ran to this officer and just collapsed sobbing hysterically. It turns out that this guy was completely wasted and high on drugs. I remember the cops walking me up to him and having me stand in front of him, asking me if I knew him, but I didn't. But I'll never forget standing in front of this huge man, looking into his brown eyes that were completely bloodshot and filled with hatred. I'll never forget that growling noise that he was making, or the look of pure horror in my little brother's eyes. My parents were called and investigated for leaving us alone like that, and the doors being like that. My mom is a different person now, doesn't drink, and is also married to a cop. She's completely changed. I remember asking her about it later on, and she told me something that I didn't know. The man had had a huge knife, so that's what he was scraping the door with. And he also had some rope, tape, and a tarp. I still don't know how he didn't get to us, or why he didn't just bust down the door to get to us. It would have taken one half-ass kick for him to kick the door down. It was that thin. It still creeps me out, and I have had nightmares from it. My husband doesn't understand why I get so furious with him when he leaves the door unlocked at night. I work third shift, so I'll come home and the door will be unlocked sometimes. It's infuriating because I then have to go through every room in the house and check the closets and the other places that a person could hide in. I have 2 kids, and they will never ever have to go through what I did. This is a current, ongoing problem. I'm young, 19, and moved states about 6 months ago, and now live with 2 roommates. Our house is built in an interesting way. The living room of the house next door to us is my bedroom. So I essentially have what used to be a kitchen, and the entire living room is my own personal space, with a wall separating me from my neighbor's house. I have 3 doors, one to get into my room from the hallway, and another that connects to the kitchen and is right next to my neighbor's other door, and the other living room door that is right next to my neighbor's front door. I'm only describing the setup because it's easier to explain how exactly my neighbor watches me and essentially stalks me through our shared wall. The issue with our neighbor, Bethany, is that she hates whoever lives in my part of the house. There's bad juju that went on between her and 2 previous tenants a couple years before me. Bethany is quite old and has 1 cat. We're not even allowed pets in the housing unit, but she's been grandfathered in. Also, has her brother over. He's a bully and a dick, and just outright dislikes all of us who live here. Bethany has another neighbor on the other side of her house, but Catherine is barely home, so I doubt she's had to go through any of what I do. Anyways, as of the last 2 months, Bethany has gotten extremely stalkerish. She doesn't follow me or my roommates, but she watches and listens. She will not start bothering me until she goes out and watches one of my roommates leave and go to their car, which she can do because she has 2 doors to go outside. Bethany's front door is the longer route and passes her living room, which she will openly watch you from. The other is connected to her bedroom, I assume, where she'll either stand on her side of the porch or hang out her window while flipping one of us off as we pass. It's very annoying, but that's all it was at first. Just petty shit, just to show that she really didn't like us. Until she started knocking. Now my wall isn't super thin. In fact, you need to be really loud to even be heard. I was already told before moving in that Bethany was somewhat hostile towards whoever lived in my room, so I should just be wary of sounds. I have 1 large TV in the corner and a desk with a computer, but I rarely use them. Bethany, on the other hand, has a TV right behind where mine is on her side of the wall. When I was home alone or getting home late, Bethany would take the time to gently knock on the door right next to mine and say in this very creepy singing voice, "I know you're home." Or if I had an Amazon package or some type of delivery back home, she would start banging the package against my door and in her creepy singing voice say, "Come out, you have a package, you have a package," over and over. She'd do this for about a few weeks straight because I was getting gifts from my family around December when this picked up. My birthday is also in December. I was also getting packages containing school supplies, home stuff, etc. But it was just chilling because she was physically waiting for me to be home. I know that the air pressure is heard and felt faintly when the very front door of our house opens, as well as the side kitchen in which I come in from, but you'd really have to be listening to know I'm coming in my room. So from December to the beginning of January, Bethany would pick up my packages from my door and just throw them at it. Not hard enough to damage them, but enough to get my attention. Sometimes she'd be really angry I wasn't answering, and others, she'd just continue being weird as hell. Our head roommate didn't deem it behavior that should get her kicked out, but she did tell our landlord, and the landlord had apparently told Bethany that she needed to quit, or next time the police were getting called, because she was disturbing our part of the property. Since then, she had limited to just screaming at us as we passed or furiously flipping me off. Whatever. She wasn't touching my stuff anymore, because that's what mattered most to me. However, as the last 2 weeks, she's gotten belligerent. At all hours of the day, beginning at around 4 to 5 a.m., she'll sing loudly towards my wall. Not just at any part, but directly in front of my bed. My bed faces the wall on the other side, and it's just creepy. She'll sing shit like, "I can hear you on the phone." At this point, it's not even insulting, it's just like, what the hell is her problem? She'll bang really hard when it gets too quiet on my end and scream obscenities. She knows when I'm showering, as a few times she screamed loud enough for me to hear her through my bathroom wall. "You slut, turn the water off." A few times, she's gone out on both of her porches and screamed at me through the door. The thing she says shows that she listens to what I'm doing. Like example, I'm FaceTiming my mom one time and she said, "Turn your phone off." I'm playing video games at volume 2 on my very quiet TV, and she'll scream, "I can hear those damn video games." Even worse, when I'm on the phone with my boyfriend, we FaceTime to fall asleep. I heard her say, not screaming, "He snores too loud." It's so disturbing. Lately the noises banging and the watching have increased by a shit ton. My head roommate is a kind and gentle soul, so she's hesitant to take action right away. I'm pretty sure these little outbursts are going to turn into her threatening me, or even worse, trying to get in one of my doors. I don't believe she's been diagnosed with anything, which of course I've considered. I've met Bethany, but I really don't want to meet her at all on my own. I might punch her in the face or get into a fight, as I don't take well to being intimidated or listened to when I'm in my private zone. I'll try to keep you guys updated on her behavior. She's quite violent, as I've heard her screaming and throwing shit at her cat and brother who come by, and it's honestly just weird. Once more, Bethany, I don't want to see you alone in person, because we're going to have an issue.
Fall had just started, and around here the weather becomes cool and breezy, and in my opinion, it's the best type of weather. It's definitely my favorite season, and last year it was no different. Around early October, I went out and bought some Halloween decorations before work one day, planning to set them up outside once I got home. Due to a coworker calling off though, I had to stay late and didn't get out until 7. I drove home as quickly as I could and started getting to work. It was kind of dark out, but with my outdoor lights on, it wasn't too bad. I started with setting up the orange lights on my bushes, and as I did, some guy came around the side of my house. He startled me, just walking up without saying a word. I found it kinda rude, so I made sure to tell him off. "Hey, you're on my property. Can you leave?" The guy looked at me with a straight face and said, "Sure thing," and started wandering down to the road. He looked 40 with short brown hair, and the way he was acting was almost like he was homeless or something. He had no care in the world and seemed to have no direction. I continued with setting up the lights, but I couldn't help but notice that the man never really left. He was on the other side of the road, wandering around, and several times I even caught him looking over at me. It was really creepy, and I ended up just going inside after finishing the lights. I had no idea who this guy was, or what he was doing by my house. I tried to tell myself it was just some harmless homeless man with no sense of boundaries, and went on with my night. I made dinner and went up to my room to watch some TV in bed. As I was upstairs, I heard something below me. It sounded like something slowly sliding on the ground. I paused the TV, but I couldn't hear it anymore. On any normal day, I probably wouldn't even check it out, but having seen that guy earlier, I just had a weird feeling, so I got up and walked downstairs. Strangely, I noticed right away that all the lights were off, which I could have sworn I didn't turn off yet. I walked a little further and into the hallway, flicking on the overhead light, then stopping to listen again. It was still quiet, however, there was a low ambient noise. It was wind howling through the rooms. I moved up to the back of the house, where I could now see the sliding back door was wide open. I felt my stomach tighten, knowing that's exactly what I heard from upstairs. Someone slowly opening the back door. At this point, I wasn't sure if I should just run out of the house or run back upstairs to get my phone. The answer is probably obvious now, but in the moment, it was hard to think straight. I wasn't even sure if someone had actually entered my home or not. I felt my adrenaline pumping as I called out, "Hello? Who's there?" I walked up to the door and looked outside quickly, not seeing anyone. I then turned back around, and somehow I managed to spot the faintest outline of a person standing in the other room, completely covered by darkness. I let out a literal gasp when I saw them, and by doing that, I think I unintentionally showed them that their cover was blown, because immediately after, he came running at me. I only saw him in the light for a fraction of a second before running out the door, but I was sure it was the same man I saw outside. As I ran through my backyard, I could hear his footsteps catching up behind me. I ran up to the closest house and started banging on the door, screaming for help. Luckily, they opened up somewhat quickly, and as I entered their home, the man stood in their front yard and just stared me down. We called the cops, but the guy had run off. It's pretty clear that while I was at work that day, the man had broken the lock on my door. Then, during the night, he tried to sneak inside my home. Had I not heard the door opening, or not noticed him hiding in the dark, who knows what he would have done that night. My family owns a huge plot of land full of trees, and on the edge of the property, they built a cabin. Compared to the main house, it feels a lot more closed off in the woods. This year, I took a trip up there around the end of October to see my parents and siblings. With the house being full, I volunteered to stay at the cabin for the few days I was there. This was the first day I arrived on the property. There wasn't a drivable road to get to the cabin, so I parked at the main house. All I had was a light backpack with my stuff, and I was only really planning on sleeping at the cabin, so I didn't bother making a trip there just to drop my bag off. Around 5, we had what I guess was a small party, as it was the first time in a while that all of us were together. We had some food and drinks, and shared updates on our lives. It was a good time, but it definitely wore out my energy after a few hours. I told them I was going to head out to the cabin for the night and get ready for bed, so I threw my backpack on and left through the back door. The trail to get there was very thin and was about a 10-minute walk. I hadn't even thought about the dark though. There were no lights or anything along the trail, so I had to put on my phone light just to see where I was stepping. A little ways down, I randomly heard a stick snap behind me. I turned and looked at the path, but my phone light was awful and barely lit up anything. I figured it was nothing and kept walking. Only a couple seconds later though, I heard it again. It was like as soon as I started walking, something behind me started walking too, like I was being followed. "Who's out there?" "Alex, I know it's you. Not funny, bro." I called out, hoping it was just my brother being annoying. I knew if it was him though, he would have been cracking up by now. I felt really uneasy as the suspense of not being able to see anything really started getting to me. I kept walking, moving faster now. I heard leaves crunch several times as I continued making my way to the cabin, though I didn't turn around, knowing I wouldn't see anything anyway. I hoped it was just my mind playing tricks on me. Maybe I drank a little too much. Whatever it was, I didn't want to be out in the woods any longer, so I hurried and finally made it to the cabin. I unlocked the door and got in, locking it behind me. After tossing my bag on the floor, I rubbed my face out of stress of whatever I just experienced. And just then, a subtle sound came from the other side of the door. It was someone turning the knob and trying to open it, and right after they figured out it was locked, they banged on it. Not just knocks, like full-on hitting the door. I almost fell over just from the jump scare of it. They kept banging on the door though, and with nothing else to do, I walked up and looked out the thin window on the side of the door to see who it was. When I did, I saw a man wearing a dark jacket and heavy boots that I'd never seen before in my life. I only looked for a moment before his eyes shot over at me. They were full of rage, and he immediately followed up by pounding on the window. Then, out of nowhere, a voice yelled from the woods. The man paused, then sprinted in the opposite direction. About 30 seconds later, I checked out the window and saw my brother Alex running up to the cabin. I guess he happened to see the guy come up behind me as I started walking to the cabin, and after asking my parents if they knew him, he immediately came running for me, To this day, we've never seen him again and don't know what he was doing out in the woods on our property or why he was stalking me. That night still scares the hell out of me to think about though. It was finally fall, which for me meant camping season. The forests around here turn yellow and orange, and the air is crisp and clean with a slight breeze. I really don't know why more people don't go outside around this time, but I'm not complaining about having the trails to myself. This year, I went on a familiar trail with a campsite that was always empty. It was right in the middle of the forest, and usually it wasn't all that special, but with the fall-colored trees, it was amazing. When I got there, I unpacked and went right away to gather some sticks for the campfire. It was around 4, so I had a good 3 hours before sunset. I was walking around the area, picking up the driest sticks I could find, and at one point I looked up and instantly froze. There was a man standing among the trees, maybe 30 feet from me. He was just watching me and had a creepy, dead stare. The man was fairly tall, with a flannel coat and jeans. I waved, but he just backed up and walked away. He seemed to just go off further into the forest, in a direction I'd never gone, but assumed was just more trees. I don't know what else he could have been doing out here other than camping, so seeing him just walking around was kind of unsettling. I made sure to keep watch around the campsite for the next little while. With all the leaves blowing around, it was impossible to hear anything, so it didn't make for the most comfortable rest of the evening. Inevitably, though, the sun went down. I got the fire going, and what I was hoping to be a peaceful night became unsettling and creepy as the forest grew darker. At least I had the fire lighting up the area around me, and although I knew it was most likely that the man I saw wasn't up to anything, I still had a bad feeling about it. I couldn't help but constantly look in all directions, and sometimes feel like I could see a shadow of a person standing just outside of my camp, but it was almost pitch black, so I couldn't tell for sure. After an hour, the night got colder than I expected, so I moved inside my tent and bundled up in my sleeping bag. The campfire slowly fizzled out over the next 30 minutes, and I was able to calm down enough to fall asleep. I don't think I was asleep for long though. I woke up very quickly, like my eyes just snapped open. I stayed laying down for a second, not sure if I'd woken up to something, or if I just happened to wake up. All I could hear were the leaves blowing into the side of my tent, and the trees calmly swaying around me. But then it was like my hearing just suddenly picked up on the very specific pattern of leaves crunching one after the other. Someone was walking around outside my tent. I sat up and felt the horror set in as I started to panic in my head. All I could think about was how vulnerable I was sitting inside this tent with no way to see what was going on or defend myself. So I did what I felt like was my only option. I quickly grabbed my bag, unzipped the tent, and ran out. When I did, I came face to face with a man. He was standing not even 5 feet from the opening of the tent, and I knew he was the same person from earlier by seeing his dead, empty stare. The most unsettling thing about it, though, is the guy didn't even flinch. He just stood there and stared at me before I turned and booked it into the woods. I didn't know where the hell I was going, but I knew I had to get out of there. Again, it was pitch black, and the wind, along with the crunching leaves under my feet, made it nearly impossible to hear, so I honestly can't say if he chased me or not. Something was definitely on my side that night though, because I happened to stumble across a part of the trail that I recognized, even in the dark. From there, I followed it back to the road. I never went back from my tent, as I was absolutely terrified of that part of the forest now. Maybe I'm overreacting, but but I really think that that man was going to take my life that night. It's just a gut feeling, I guess. Either way, I'll never be camping out in those woods again. This was in 2016. My parents had just moved to the West Coast, and I was on my way driving there to visit them. A lot of the way there is pretty empty, with only a few gas stations spread out down the long highway. At some point during my second night of driving, my check engine light came on in my car. I wasn't exactly surprised, because my car was old and not very reliable, but I wasn't really a car person either, and I had no clue what could be going on with it. I looked up where the next gas station was. It was another 30 miles away, but I really had no choice but to make it there. However, my car decided to make the choice for me instead though, as the engine suddenly cut out, leaving me coasting along the side of the road until I eventually stopped. I tried everything I could to get it working again. I even got out and looked under the hood for any possible causes of the problem, but I saw nothing. Honestly, I thought this was just the final leg of my car. In the meantime, all I could do was find a way to get help. I pulled my phone out, and I immediately felt my stomach drop as I had no service. I tried a few calls anyway, but obviously none of them went through. After 30 minutes of trying to find a solution, I realized I really only had one option, which was to hitchhike a ride. I'd never done it before, and I was kind of nervous, not really knowing what to expect. I always found it as a strange thing that I never thought I'd ever do. I stood out there on the side of the road and just waited. Every 15 or so minutes, a single car would pass by, but none of them stopped for me. This went on for hours. It was probably 2 or 3 a.m. before I saw the headlights of another car coming down the road. I stuck my thumb out, assuming it would pass by like all the rest, but to my surprise, they started pulling over. It was a black pickup truck, and I couldn't really see the driver until I walked around to the side of their car. He was a very skinny man with a long, thin face, and matched with his long black hair, it was a little unsettling. "Need a lift?" he said happily, with a big grin. Something really put me off about this guy, but honestly, I was tired, and this might be my only opportunity to get a ride, so I didn't pass it up. I hopped in the back seat. I felt like it would have been awkward if we didn't have some small talk, so I asked him what he was up to tonight. "Just cruising on the highway," he responded, like it was a hobby of his or something, which was kind of strange since we were in the middle of nowhere. I was surprised he didn't ask me what I was up to or why I needed a ride, but I tried to think of another question just to keep the conversation going. The man interrupted my train of thought though, when he looked at me for a few seconds in the mirror. "You don't have any weapons on you, right? Just making sure I'm safe," he said, with again that odd smile of his. I said no, thinking it was a strange question to bluntly ask, but maybe he really was just trying to watch out for himself. I don't know, but after that I stopped talking. 10 more minutes went by as I just stared out the window before the man made a sudden turn off the highway and onto a dirt road. I immediately sat up and looked around, realizing this was definitely not right. "Where are we going?" He shot a quick look at me, then continued to drive without answering. I asked him again, more loudly, as the fear was building up. "Where are you taking me?" At this point, I knew that no matter what, the next time this car stops, I was going to bolt, so I got ready with my hand on the door. As he drove down this beaten dirt road, suddenly a small farmhouse appeared in the dim lights. Its front door was wide open, and the whole place looked like it was decaying and falling in on itself. Once we got up closer, he suddenly slammed on the brakes. I jolted forward into the seat, and the man instantly swung his door open and ran around to the side door. I swung mine open as well and sprinted out, heading right for the tree line. The man ran around the car and came running up behind me, but once we were in the woods, it was so dark that I could only hear his footsteps and could no longer see him, even though he was just 10 or 15 feet behind me. I took a sharp turn, getting behind a tree and holding my breath. His footsteps came right up past me and continued further into the woods. A whole minute passed before I heard his creepy voice call out for me. Over and over, he'd repeat the same lines in the same tone of voice. "Come on, let's go back. I'll give you a ride. I wasn't trying to scare you." It was extremely disturbing. Even worse, I never heard his footsteps go back toward the car, so I had no idea where he was, or if he was lurking in the dark somewhere nearby. I knew I had to leave though, so I started quietly walking in the direction of the main road, or at least what I thought was that direction. I really couldn't see anything, but once I was deeper in the woods, I pulled my phone out and turned the brightness on low. Somehow, I happened to have service now. I almost wanted to cry from the relief. I dialed 911 and had them track the call so they knew where I was. Thankfully, I made it back to the main road and met 2 officers there. By that time, the man and the car were somehow gone. I don't know how he managed to get out of there without being seen. As for the farmhouse, it was just what it looked like. Some old, abandoned place, which makes it even stranger that the man knew exactly where it was and turned into it on purpose. I have no idea what he was going to do. I'm just glad I didn't have to find out. I was working a quick DoorDash shift on a Monday night. I got out of my day job at 7 and decided to make a few deliveries. It was a pretty regular, quiet night with nothing much to note. I delivered about 7 or 8 orders before I took my last one for the night. I drove it down to the house and dropped it off, then started heading back into town where my apartment was. It was around 10 o'clock now, and after that delivery, I was about 20 minutes out in the farmland that surrounds our town. A couple minutes into my drive back, I saw a figure standing in the middle of the road. I slowed down, and the man moved over a little bit, but not enough to be out of my way. Once I got closer, he looked right at me and stuck his thumb out. In my headlights, I could tell he was an older guy, like early 50s, and he had a large backpack over his shoulders. Since I was already slowing down, I figured I'd be helpful and ask if he needed a ride into the city, since I was heading that way anyways. He leaned on the windowsill and thanked me for stopping. His eyes looked heavy and exhausted, like he hadn't slept in days, but he seemed nice enough, so I agreed to give him a ride. What I wasn't expecting, though, was for him to immediately open the passenger door and sit in the seat right next to me. It didn't really matter, I guess, but I felt like it was usually common courtesy to get in the back seat. As he got situated, I looked past him at where he came from. It was a field of tall grass, just a huge farm or something. "You from around here? What brings you out to the farmlands?" He looked over at me. "Just making my way across the country to visit my family. Don't have a car, so I've been hitching rides." I thought that was pretty interesting, so I asked more about where he was from, but he gave me very vague and uninterested answers. A couple times, I caught him looking into my back seat. Not just quick glances though, like he was running his eyes through the whole back seat and looking for something. Something about this guy started to make me feel off. He wasn't talking much, and was just acting really unusual. "Is everything okay?" I asked. I still had my eyes on the road, but he didn't say anything, so then I looked over at him. My eyes were drawn to his disturbing stare, before I noticed the knife he had clenched in his right hand. "Stop the car." I didn't say a word and parked right in the middle of the road. I was terrified and just thought if I let him take whatever he wanted, then I'd get out unharmed. So that's exactly what I was going to do. As soon as the car was in park, I turned to open my door, but he quickly stopped me. "Get in the back," he demanded, still clenching the knife. I froze up for a moment, realizing we were in the middle of empty fields, and that if I get in the back, I'll probably never have another chance to escape. He told me again, and that's also when I noticed his large backpack was slightly open by his feet, revealing a thick bundle of rope. I had no choice but to try my luck escaping now, before it was too late. I opened the door and jumped out of the car in one swift motion. The man tried jumping across the front seat to grab me, but I sprinted to the other side of the road and into the tall grass. I kept on running through the field until I felt like he couldn't find me. Then I stood still and waited. He yelled a few times from the road, but then it went quiet. All I could hear was the wind blowing the grass around. I stood still and motionless for a good 15 minutes before I slowly made my way back toward the road. I looked through the grass and could see my headlights still beaming onto the pavement and the driver door still open. The man was nowhere to be seen. After scoping it out for another minute, I sprinted up and grabbed my phone, then ran back into the grass and called 911. I didn't know if he was still hiding somewhere, waiting for me, so I didn't risk staying up there. Eventually, the police showed up, though. I couldn't believe the man didn't drive away in my car. He must have just grabbed his backpack and run off into the other field, or maybe even tried chasing me through the grass and just didn't find me. Either way, it clearly showed that his intentions were not to just rob me of my belongings, which makes the scenario 100 times more disturbing. I gave the police a description of the man, but there still haven't been any sightings.
When I was 20 years old, I worked the night shift at Walmart when it was still open 24 hours. The majority of it was stocking shelves rather than dealing with customers. Not many other employees were needed to work nights either. Of course, the occasions when I did have to deal with people were some of the weirdest encounters of my life. One night, I was putting toys up on the shelves in the boys section when a man appeared at the end of the aisle. I looked over and saw he was smiling. He was a larger man, over 6 feet tall and muscular. He was also rough-looking and had a lot of tattoos, making it seem obvious he had spent a long time doing hard manual labor or hard time in prison, or more likely both. Either way, with me being on the shorter side and not being athletic, this guy dwarfed me. After we made eye contact, he commented on the toy box I was holding in my hand that I had meant to put on the shelf. It was a G.I. Joe action figure. The man said I would look cute playing with that doll. Taken aback, I asked him to repeat himself. The man laughed it off and moved on, but what he said next wasn't any better. He asked me where the lube was. I sighed and told him it was all the way on the other side of the store, near the pharmacy, by the condoms, which were next to the medicines. Unfortunately, I also had to tell him that the shelf with all the family planning type things was locked up, so I had to go with him and unlock it. Not only did I have to stop what I was doing for this guy, I also had to walk with him for several hundred feet. He, on the other hand, was pleased. I tried to walk as quickly as possible, but he intentionally lagged behind so he could get more time to talk to me. It was normal small talk at first, but then he started asking increasingly personal questions about me. It started out with asking where I went to school, how long I'd been working at Walmart, and by the time we finally got to the aisle and I opened up the shelf for him, he was asking if I ever had a girlfriend. When I said no, he asked me if that was because it wasn't girls that I was into. I was speechless. The man reached into the shelf and took out the bottle of lube, then grabbed my wrist and pulled my arm up, placing the lube in my hand. Then, he told me that this kind of lube was the best for beginners because it had a numbing agent. I recoiled in shock, shoving the bottle at him and slamming the shelf closed. I told him off for being a creep and threatened to have him kicked out of the store. Then I stormed back to the toy aisle so I could get back to work. He didn't follow me, but I made quick work of clearing the cart so I could go into the back of the store. I hid there for as long as I could get away with. Then I went back out and unloaded another cart. I didn't see anyone out there the whole time. I figured the creep had left. I entered the second stall, closed the door, and sat down on the toilet. Immediately, I realized I'd made a horrible mistake, as I saw a pair of feet lowering to the floor of the stall next to me. They clearly belonged to the man from before. It was as if he had been hiding and waiting for me. In a panic, I rushed to stand up and put on my pants, but before I knew it, the man had come out of the stall and walked around to block my escape. I could see his feet just below the door and just barely the top of his head above it. He told me from the other side to hold out my hands because this was my last chance to apply the lube, as he wasn't going to bother with it. Then his hand emerged at the top of the door and held the bottle of lube over it. The bottle was open. He squeezed it, sending a long, slimy strand of fluid spilling to the floor. It made a wet, slapping sound on the tile as it formed a puddle. He said he was giving me a moment to rub it all the way in. I was in shock. I didn't know what to do. I was trapped. Suddenly, the door swung open with a bang. The lock didn't stand a chance of stopping him. He stood in the doorway, grinning. He saw that I had my pants on and told me I made the wrong choice. Then he lunged forward at me. He pinned me against the wall, then grabbed me by my throat and started to squeeze, strangling me. The blood flow to my brain was cut off. Despite my attempts to hit his face and groin and try to break free, everything started to go black. I couldn't even scream. I was on the verge of passing out. A moment before it was over, I felt my neck get released and my body fell to the floor. I don't know how long it took for me to fully wake back up, but when I did, I saw the man fighting with one of my coworkers. They had their belt wrapped around his neck and they were strangling him from behind. But they were being slammed against the wall, so I ran up, jammed my thumbs into his eyes, and kicked him in the groin. He shouted in pain, but then he kicked me back to the floor and threw my coworker over his shoulder. They landed on me as the man ran off. We were too hurt to follow. We weren't seriously injured, but the man got away. And police never caught up to him. I owe my old coworker everything for saving me from what was about to happen. If he had held off for 20 more minutes, he would have walked into a much more gruesome scene. I grew up in a small town in the middle of nowhere that was like a tiny tumor on the artery that was Interstate 40. Naturally, this meant there weren't many jobs to choose from. By the time I was 18, I knew I wanted to move away, but I had no money, so I got the only job I could, the graveyard shift at the gas station. It was miserable hours and terrible pay, and there was pretty much nothing to do except keep the store open for late-night travelers. I worked there for about 6 months from 10 p.m. to 7 a.m., Monday through Saturday. It was monotonous and mind-numbing, and it was all I did. I was always too tired during the day and had become an antisocial hermit. I saved up money, little by little. I spent every hour there daydreaming about finally packing all my stuff into my truck and driving until I saw the ocean for the first time in my life. That dream kept me there. But I was waiting for something to happen that would make me leave before my goal of saving $10,000. One night, I got my wish in the worst of ways. The first half of the evening had gone normally. Then it hit 3 a.m., the deadest hour of the night. That was always when I took my 30-minute break. People rarely came in while I was off the clock, but I still helped them. That night, I was doing my usual break routine of lying on the floor on a blanket when I heard a vehicle roll into the station and shut off the engine. I stayed put since I didn't expect them to come inside. Several minutes passed, and I didn't hear anything. I figured after a while, they would have finished pumping their gas and left, which meant I would have heard them start their engine. Finally, I got up to see what was happening. What I saw sent a chill down my spine. There was a man parked at the pump, standing next to an old white windowless van. He was staring across the pavement into the store. When I came into view, he turned his head and looked directly at me. We stared at each other for an uncomfortable amount of time before he finally walked very slowly into the store. He entered and stopped on the doormat, staring at me for another awkward few seconds. I asked him if he needed help with anything. Then he walked up to the counter and put down a $50 bill. I asked what he wanted, and in a very deep, raspy voice, he slowly asked for a single cigarillo a lighter, all these $1 bottles of Fireball, and the rest on gas. I asked how many bottles he wanted, and he grabbed 2 handfuls from the display by the register and dropped them on the counter. In total, it was 12 bottles. After all that, there was still about $30 for gas. I started to put the little bottles in a bag, but the man quickly grunted to say no. He picked up one of the bottles and handed it to me. I declined to take it at first, but he aggressively shoved it at me, so I decided to go along with him. He opened one for himself, and we both chugged them down at the same time. Immediately after, he opened another and poured the whole thing in his mouth, dropping the empty bottle onto the floor. Then he opened another and drank it too. I told him to stop dropping them, but he ignored me. I didn't get paid enough to fight him, so I let him do his thing. He downed every single last one. Finally, he took his cigarillo, unwrapped it, and stuck it into his mouth. He put his lighter in his pocket and left with a quiet, "Thank you." I was amused but also freaked out. Nobody should drive after drinking that much, I thought. And was he also about to smoke the cigar while pumping his gas? That's what it looked like, so about a minute after he walked out the door, I peeked outside to see what he was doing. To my horror, I saw the worst possible outcome. The man was standing at the back door of his van, cigar in his mouth, holding the nozzle to his side, pouring gasoline all over the ground. I gasped in shock, paralyzed for a moment as he stared at me with an empty expression. I snapped into action and ran out of the store to push the emergency stop button on the outside wall, but when I got to it, I realized something heartbreaking. The protective covering over the button had been padlocked shut while I was on the floor ignoring him. I turned back to the man spewing gasoline all over the station. He was looking at me still. His clothes were drenched in fuel. The smell of gasoline was overpowering. I screamed at him, begging him to stop. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out the lighter, put it up to the cigar, and then sparked the flint. The vapors ignited into a massive fireball, instantly engulfing him and the van in flames. The heat and pressure blew me back and singed my face. When the initial blast dissipated, the entire station was still in flames. The nozzle was spewing what looked like lava all over the ground. I saw the man still standing, burning silently before falling to the ground, almost looking calm. I finally came to my senses and ran, dialing 911. By the time firefighters arrived, the entire pumping area of the gas station was a charred heap, and the flames were spreading to the store. They managed to save it from being totally destroyed, and luckily, my truck was parked in the back and came out unscathed. Human remains were found in the van, evidently in a tied-up position, charred beyond recognition. Weeks later, my dad called and told me dental records revealed it was his wife. Nobody knows for sure what happened between them that caused the incident, but I didn't stick around to find out. I skipped town a few days later, and I've never been back. I don't think I ever can. That town is now the location of my worst memory. The night I watched a man burn himself alive. I used to be a police officer for 22 years. I retired due to a back injury, and now I'm in law school. My fellow students are often curious about my experience on the force. One thing they ask about is the scariest thing I went through on the job, and I always have the same answer. It was my first year as an officer. Back then, I was stuck on the graveyard shift. I had a partner, Kurt, who had a little more experience. We had a set neighborhood to patrol. We would drive up and down the blocks for about an hour. Then we would park and shut off the engine for a little while before getting back on the street. When there was a call, we answered it. When there was a drunk driver, we pulled them over. Sometimes stuff just happened right in front of us, and this was one of those times. Kurt and I were rolling down one of the more dangerous streets in the neighborhood when a woman came running out of an alleyway, screaming for help. She was waving her hands in the air, wearing dirty clothes, and had thin, greasy hair, so it seemed like she was living in that alley. Kurt parked the car up on the curb, and I got out to help the woman. She was completely hysterical, sobbing incoherently. By the time I calmed her down and asked what was wrong, Kurt was with us. She pointed back to the alleyway and screamed that her boyfriend was dying. She said it over and over. "He's dying, he's dying, he's dying." But she never said what he was dying from. She began at that moment to topple over onto me, hanging from my shoulders and still sobbing and screaming. Kurt told me to stay put with her while he checked out the alley. Then he walked off into the shadows while I was stuck with a wailing wreck of a woman. She was totally inconsolable. I tried to calm her down, but she was grabbing at my clothes, begging me to save her boyfriend. I kept pushing her away, telling her to stay put, but she kept getting in my personal space, putting me on edge and wearing my patience thin. I was over it quite quickly, so I hollered over to Kurt. I was hoping for him to give any reason for me to ditch the woman that was climbing all over me. Instead, I heard nothing. No response. I shouted again, even louder, but still had no word from Kurt. I knew something was wrong, so I had to make my way over to the alleyway. However, when I looked down at the woman at my chest, I noticed that suddenly she was very calm. Then I saw her arm at my side, trying to unholster my service weapon. I shoved her away as hard as I could, but she pulled out a knife and came running right back at me. I acted on my reflexes and quickly unholstered my weapon, firing it 3 times. The woman collapsed at my feet. I stepped back, afraid she might try to cut my ankles. She was silent for a moment before she groaned in pain, gasped for air, and reached for her wounds, then passed out. I knew she would most likely die before the ambulance arrived, and I couldn't help her as I had to help Kurt, but I called in for backup and medical. Just after finishing my sentence to dispatch, the initial reflexive surge of numbness went away, and a wave of dread washed over me, chilling my blood to ice. I was alone. I had just killed a woman, and my partner was in dire need of help. If there was any hope of saving him, if he was even still alive, I had to enter that alley and confront the other perpetrator, or perpetrators, however many of them there were. I could wait for backup, but those few minutes might be the difference between Kurt living or dying. The weight and reality of the duty I swore myself to suddenly became crystal clear. I steeled myself and approached the entrance of the alleyway with my service weapon still drawn. It was a dead end. Light from the street illuminated the first 15 feet and cast my shadow into it, but after that, it was pitch black. I took out my flashlight with my left hand and positioned it right under my wrist. I could see to the end of the alley, but there was nobody in sight. There was a dumpster and a stack of cardboard boxes on one side, and a small shelter with a tarp on the other. I shouted into the alley, demanding whoever was in there come out with their hands up. Then a shot rang out. I heard it whiz by me, so I immediately took cover around the corner. My heart was pounding, and it felt like I couldn't breathe fast enough. I called for more much-needed backup, and as I was speaking, a figure sprinted out of the alleyway. For a moment, I didn't comprehend what I had just seen. Then I realized it was a man running away at top speed. I quickly dropped my radio and flashlight and aimed at him, but by then, he was already over 50 feet away and getting further every second. If I missed, the stray could go straight through someone's window, so I made the decision not to fire. Instead, I rushed into the alley to find Kurt. He was bleeding on the ground under the tarp, and his head was bleeding. He was alive and just beginning to regain consciousness. While helping him, I saw that his service weapon was missing. I realized it had been stolen and used against me. Kurt survived, but unfortunately, the woman I shot died, and the other perpetrator was never identified or caught. However, it's likely he was arrested for some other crime later. To this day, I count that night as the most terrifying and inexplicable experience I went through on the force. You would never think that 2 people would coordinate an ambush on a pair of police officers to attempt to steal their weapons, probably just to stick up a gas station, but with enough desperation and drug-addled thinking, people are capable of anything. I only hope that man didn't end up hurting anybody else, but I know it's a fool's hope.
Under the Texas blazing sun, Hawaiian Falls Water Park buzzed with laughter and energy. Family and friends flocked to the slides, eager to escape the heat and enjoy the many rides it had to offer. My brother and I were enjoying the tidal waves when he pointed at another ride named Aquatube, located at the left corner of the water park.
Look, Larry, I bet that'll be way more fun. What do you say, want to try?
His shiny teeth flashed into a smile, and I knew we were going to try that ride. It's impossible to turn my brother around when he has his mind set on something. Ain't that too high, Bob?
Bark, 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 bark. Oh, are you a chicken?
Nice, Bob. Really nice. You're so mature.
Oh, come on, you'll be just fine. It ain't that big.
That's probably what your ex said before leaving you.
Shut up, let's go.
The air was filled with the stink of sweat and chlorine as we ascended the steps to the Aquatube. It was advertised proudly as the tallest in a 100-mile radius, and I believed it. I've never dealt well with heights, and looking down over the edge of the railing made me feel a bit queasy. I wasn't sure how I was going to endure actually sliding down the attraction itself.
Hey Larry, look. Even those chicks are braver than you. Stop freaking yourself out, man. Just enjoy.
As we walked up those never-ending stairs, my brother got busy flirting with the group of girls ahead of us. After what felt like hours of climbing, we reached the top. The round entrance of the slide yawned before us. It reminded me of the mouth of the shark from Jaws. Water rushed down the tube, creating a constant gentle roar that made it a little difficult to hear, and it was pitch dark inside the tube. One by one, the park patrons in front of us were guided by the bored-looking attendant into the slide, after which he'd start a stopwatch and look at it for about 30 seconds. I figured that was how he made sure that nobody bumped into each other on the way down. Eventually, our turn came with Bob going first. I was shaking, extremely nervous, and my brother could tell. He put a hand on my right shoulder and told me, "It's gonna be all right, Larry. I'll see you down at the bottom." His teeth sparkled once again from the basking sunlight as he smiled at me. He very confidently glided down the slide. Woo! I stood there, staring at the dark tube ready to gulp me like a prey.
Move, will ya? We don't have all day.
Yes. Excuse me. Has there been any accident in the slide so far?
Boy, don't waste my time. If you're so damn scared, then go to the kids' pool. Came here to the water park for silly chit-chat.
The attendant was growing impatient with me, and it was a do-or-die situation for me. I sat down while a stream of water flowed under me.
Remember to stay still and keep your legs crossed. Enjoy.
The grumpy middle-aged attendant pushed my shoulders down, and I started to slide down the dark tube. Now, those who have been inside the aqua tube know how the ambience shifts in seconds once you go down. It's like all of a sudden, all the sounds of life die down, and all you're left with is the echoing splashing of water and trapped wind traveling through the hollow. My heart never pumped so fast.
Ah! Bobby, I'm gonna kill you for this! Why did I even agree to this? Damn it!
I slid like a leaf on a river, not knowing when I would meet the end. All I wanted was to see the sky. 30 seconds into the slide, something happened. So far, I kept my eyes closed out of fear. But then, I didn't feel myself moving anymore. Also, the stream of water that was supposed to help guide me down had stopped running. When I opened my eyes, I found myself in complete darkness.
Bob? What's happening?
I trembled my body, thinking it might help to start the gliding again. But the surface of the tube was as dry as a desert.
Hello? Can anyone hear me?
I realized I was stuck.
Hello? I'm stuck down here. Someone? Anyone? Oh no. Why is this happening to me?
Sweat started drenching me. My heart raced in my throat. Breathing became difficult. Oxygen felt scarce. The air grew hotter, and I had no clue if anyone knew I was trapped there.
Bobby, please! Help me! I don't want to die in here!
I felt the walls begin to close in around me, pushing, nudging at my limbs. It felt like I couldn't breathe anymore. Everything was closing in fast.
No, I can't give up. I have to try to crawl down.
I began to move my legs, dragging my body downward. It wasn't easy. Without water, I risked falling hard on the landing. Darkness obscured the tube structure. I couldn't see far ahead. But then suddenly, water started to flow again.
Oh, thank God.
My brother probably went to the attendant when he didn't see me coming out of the slide. They must have realized their mistake. As I started to slide, a loud noise and vibrations approached me. Before I could figure out what it was, something hit me hard and my vision blurred.
Larry, wake up, bud.
My brother's voice pulled me out of the unconscious state, and I felt excruciating pain on my back and shoulders. What happened to me?
Are you crazy, dude? I could have killed you!
I saw a heavy-set guy standing in his swim trunks looking down at me with a panic-stricken face. I realized there was a small crowd of people surrounding me. Everyone was shocked, and so was I. Larry, what happened in there? When you didn't come out for 5 minutes, I got worried and went back to the top, but the attendant said...
I got stuck. The water stopped running, and I almost died in there. Oh, God. I think I'm gonna be sick.
Later, I found out that while I was stuck inside the tube, the water came back on. A heavy-set guy came down the slide, crashing into me and forcing me out, landing on top of me in the plunge pool. It turns out the attendant hadn't checked to see if I had exited the slide. When I was 14, I went on vacation with my parents and my uncle's family. My cousin Miles, who was 2 years younger than me, was my best friend. One weekend, our dads took us to a nearby water park while they enjoyed food and drinks at the cafe. Miles and I headed straight for the rides. We spent the day trying different slides and waiting in line for various attractions. Since I was older, my dad trusted me to look after both of us. We had done this before, so we didn't expect any trouble. Dude, let's try the splash pool. Sure, but if you pee in it, the water turns blue. I hope you know that. Shut up! I never pee in public pools. Oh? Then why do you smell so bad all the time? We were chatting and joking around, and I was teasing Miles like an older brother would. Suddenly, two men who seemed to be in their 50s started laughing at something we said. We hadn't noticed them watching us before. We smiled at them briefly, then went back to our conversation. So, as I was saying, Mr. Smelly Cat, I will punch you if you call me that one more time. We were alone when we heard those men make some uncomfortable remarks. Oh, those bikinis are nice. Hey, girls, wanna come with us? Out of the corner of my eye, I saw one of the men grinning creepily at the other, as if they just cracked a big joke when two girls walked by, clearly creeping them out. One of the men even rubbed his hand on his chest in a creepy way. Someone should report them to security. Someone definitely will. Jerks! Miles cursed them a little too loudly, and I saw one of the men watching us as we walked away. I immediately noticed a lot of red flags and knew it would only get worse if we gave them any more attention. For the next 15 minutes, we had fun jumping and splashing at each other in the pool. Our dads came over once and called us for ice cream. We said we'd be right there, but then Miles told me he needed to pee. He was scared the water would turn blue if he did it in the pool, so we got out and headed to the washroom. There were 4 washrooms located around the water park. The closest to us was behind the trash can section. Also, it was the emptiest one, so we rushed to it so we could both be done with our business in no time. Inside the washroom, there were 4 stalls. Miles and I took the first 2 since I also needed to go. As I finished and flushed, I heard footsteps entering the washroom. Then, I heard 2 voices. Why don't you guard the door? But what if they tackle you? You think those skinny brats will outrun me? Fine. I'm gonna watch out and stop people from entering. But how will you do that? I'll tell them maintenance work is taking place. Good idea. One pair of footsteps left the bathroom, and another pair started coming close towards our door. Bro, did you... Keep quiet. The footsteps stopped right outside my door. I saw a man's shadow under the stall. Carefully, I crouched down to check if he was alone. I peeked out and saw 2 ugly, hairy feet with dirty nails right outside my stall. I was paralyzed with fear. It was clear that they were up to no good. Quickly, I silently texted my dad, wanting these creeps to get caught red-handed. But then the banging started.
Come out, come out! I have treats for you boys. Leave us alone!
Miles, calm down. Don't respond to him.
Calm down? How can you expect me to stay calm when there's some creep outside our door? Screw that! Oh God. Help! Help! Someone please help us! This freak is trying to kill us! What did you call me? I swear, once I get my hands on you, I'll skin you alive, you little piece of... You can't even touch us. The doors are strong enough to hold us until help comes. Really? Why don't I test it then?
Saying this, the man backed away. I could hear his footsteps going toward the sink. The sound of rampaging through the whole washroom echoed in our ears. I guess he was trying to find something to use to break our doors. But when he finally couldn't, he started throwing himself at my door. With his gigantic weight, the silicone door shuddered. There was chaos inside the washroom, like a storm brewing. Miles kept screaming, but I knew our dads would arrive any minute. I didn't mention it to the man because I wanted him to face the consequences. He went for the fourth strike when I heard my uncle and dad burst into the washroom.
Miles, Gerald, come out. Security, this is the other guy. Get these morons out here and make sure you report them to the cops.
I emerged from the washroom to find Miles had fainted from panic inside his stall. The security team dragged those two men out of the water park, and then the local police escorted them away. My dad and I went to the police station, where I explained how these men had been harassing young girls in the park and became aggressive when we confronted them. They were arrested on charges of harassment, vandalism, and attempted murder. One of them even had a pocket knife. Who knows what could have happened to me and my cousin if they had caught us. My first job was at a busy locally owned pizza place. My family was there on occasions throughout my whole life. It was the only pizza place in town that wasn't just a big chain, so it was very popular. I started as a server. However, just after I finished my training, the delivery guy quit without notice. I was there on the day it happened. He walked half an hour late from a delivery, looking like he had just seen a ghost. He was shaking and sweating profusely, and there was a noticeable limp in his step that he didn't have earlier. I asked him if he was alright, but he ignored me, limping into the owner's office. He was in there for just a minute or two. Then he came out and left the restaurant without saying a word. That was the last time I or anyone I know saw him as far as I'm aware. He basically got in his car and skipped town. Soon after, the owner came out of the office and told me I was the new delivery boy until he hired a new one. Coming right off seeing how the last guy looked, I was nervous about it. But I couldn't exactly refuse if I wanted to keep working there. I also had the problem of not really knowing the roads very well, as I had just recently started driving. All I had to navigate was a paper map, which had a big red circle on it indicating the delivery area. The first few days weren't as bad as I expected them to be. I only got lost once or twice. Then my coworker gave me my next delivery address, and when I found it on the map, it was at the very edge of the red circle. It took me 20 minutes to drive there, and by then, it was dark out. When I arrived at the address, I got very confused. I was out in a sparsely populated area where most of the homes were trailers, but the house I was going to was large and old, set back quite a ways from the road. It had a dirt driveway that was poorly maintained, which led up to an equally shabby house. I couldn't see any indications that anyone actually lived there, but I drove up to it anyway. I knocked on the door, honestly hoping nobody would answer, but somebody did, and I was quite surprised by them. It was a beautiful woman, about 20 years old, wearing some pretty skimpy clothes. The only thing about her that kept her from looking totally out of place in that house was that she also looked a bit rough around the edges, like she wasn't maintaining the best hygiene in there. Of course, I didn't care about that. I had every intention of asking for her phone number after she paid for the pizza. I didn't handle the interaction very well though, and I stumbled through asking if she had ordered it. She smirked and looked me up and down. Then she asked if I was nervous. I admitted that I was, but I kept going with the transaction and tried handing her the pizza, prompting her to go look for some cash. She dug through the tiny pockets on her short shorts, checked in her waistband and her bra, and even bent over to check in her boots, giving me an eyeful that seemed very purposeful. The next moment was like something out of a cheesy, dirty movie. She said to me that she must have misplaced her cash, but I was welcome to come in and quote-unquote help her find it. My blood pressure shot through the roof. I knew there was no possible way that I as a teenage guy could resist the temptation of what she was implying. She leaned up against the door frame, sticking out her hips, letting the door open wide. The look on her face had a chokehold on me. But then I saw something that gave me some sense. The moon must have come out from behind a cloud, as the slightest ray of light came over my shoulder and shined inside the house. It illuminated the hulking silhouette of a large muscular man. And then the eyes shimmered, almost like the eyes of a cat under a flashlight. Powerful second thoughts came over me, and the woman at the door must have noticed something, because she suddenly dropped the act and grabbed me. I dropped the pizza on the floor as I fought to get her hands off my arms, and I could hear the stomping of the man inside rushing to help her. At the last second, I ripped her hands away and started sprinting back to my car. The man inside came out and ran after me, but I was able to get in and drive away before I got caught. I drove right back to the restaurant, and when I burst through the doors in a panic, my coworkers all looked at me and must have collectively thought, "Oh, not again." I told my boss what happened, and he thanked me for giving him an explanation unlike the last guy. He called the police on the address, and later on I heard that the woman and her accomplice were arrested. However, the cops weren't very sympathetic to my story, so they only got charged with trespassing. Unfortunately, those charges were dropped as the house actually belonged to the girl's grandmother, who had recently died, so the property hadn't technically traded hands yet. I was left wondering what they were planning on doing to me, if they were just going to rob me or if they had more sinister intentions. I have to think about the previous delivery driver, and the fact that the people inside the house were probably the reason he quit and ran away, based on the limp and the lifeless eyes. I think something really awful happened to him after he got lured inside by that woman. At that time, in that town, that kind of stuff didn't get talked about, so I think he was just too ashamed to report it. I'm just glad I was able to overcome the temptation and didn't fall into the same trap. I was a pizza delivery driver during my sophomore year of college. I'll never forget my worst day on the job. The whole town was overrun for the first home game of the season against our big rival. I was bummed out when I realized I was scheduled that evening. What's worse, I found out that when the football games come to town and all the roads jam up, my boss knew the deliveries would never arrive on time by car, so he made us ride bicycles. On the one hand, I was saving money on gas, as well as getting some exercise and bypassing all the traffic by riding on the sidewalk. On the other hand, it was horribly hot and humid, so I was sweating like a pig. Plus, there was a huge spike in the number of deliveries I had to make. By the second hour of my shift, my clothes were soaked with sweat, and as the game got more intense, people started tipping less and shooing me off quicker, so it really sucked. By the last hour of my shift, I was absolutely done. I never wanted to ride a bike again. Thankfully, the game was over, so it was less busy. Then, I got my last delivery of my shift. I pushed off one last time, heaving myself along with my last bit of stamina. I was huffing and puffing by the time I got to the address, and ready to get the whole thing over with. However, I noticed how odd the house was. It was in a neighborhood I was aware of a lot of students living in, so since all the houses were rentals, they were all fairly well kept. But this house was in visible disrepair. The man inside was also odd. After I rang the bell, and he made me wait in the warm, swampy air for almost 2 minutes, he finally slowly opened the door. He was a small, hunchback old man who looked quite out of it. He looked at me and smiled, saying, "Oh look, a visitor. My nephew loves visitors." I explained to him that I was delivering a pizza, and he looked confused. After a moment, he rolled his eyes and excused himself for being old and doddery, saying his nephew must have ordered it. Then he walked away, telling me to come in and get out of the weather. Normally I never would have, but I was sick of being out in the heat, and this guy looked harmless, so I stepped in. The man waved his hand at me to follow him, saying his nephew was downstairs in the basement. I said I would rather they pay me at the door, but the old man shook his head and said he didn't have any money, and his nephew wanted me to go to him. Wanting to get the night over with, I met the old man at the entrance of the basement. He pulled a chain, turning on a dim orange light that lit up the stairs and the first few feet of the basement floor. I saw a coffee table, and that's where the old man told me to put the pizza. I also noticed a wad of cash on the table, which looked like it was more than enough. So in a desperate bid for a well-deserved tip, I took the risk and cautiously descended the stairs. When I got to the bottom, I couldn't see anything else but the table right in front of me. So I carefully set the pizza down and grabbed the wad of cash, stuffing it into my back pocket without bothering to count. Then, I turned to go back upstairs. And that's when the old man at the top called out to me saying, "You two kids have fun down there." Then, he slammed the door. I panicked and grabbed my phone, trying to shine a light. But just as I turned on the screen, a large hand grabbed my wrist. Then, a deep voice whispered to me, "Don't." I froze in terror and complied. A few seconds later, the hand released me. Then I heard feet shuffling behind me. I thought I was about to die, but then the same voice said to me, "If you turn around, I will kill you." I whimpered, "Okay." And then a flashlight clicked on from behind me, illuminating the stairway. I heard the voice tell me to go, so I forced every fiber of my being not to turn around and quickly made my way up the stairs, trembling. The moment I put my hand on the doorknob, the light turned off. I rushed out to the other side of the door and shut it without glancing back. I looked around the foyer, but I saw no sign of the old man. I didn't care about finding him, so I ran out the door. Then I got on my bike and pedaled back to the shop as quickly as I could. I tried to hide my adrenaline as exhaustion to my boss, which mostly worked. He let me off early without having to close since I had been working so hard all day. I walked home looking over my shoulder, wondering if I should call the police. Initially, I wrote it off as a weird shut-in not wanting to be seen, but it kept bothering me. Eventually, I went back to the neighborhood and asked around about the people that lived in the house. I discovered that the old man lived alone at the house and was in the early stages of dementia, so the only people who visited him were nurses. I was able to get his name, but when I looked him up, the only relevant result was a younger man with the same last name. It was the mugshot of a fugitive who had escaped custody after being arrested in the area for armed robbery. My guess is he was that old man's nephew, and he was trying to lay low at the house but ended up starving for some food. His doddery old man must have screwed up his plan to get pizza delivered anonymously. I called the police to check the house at that realization, but by then, there was nobody home but the old man. I'm glad the man in the basement took mercy on me, but even then, I hope he gets arrested for his original crime, as an innocent person could end up being collateral damage. I used to be a delivery driver for a pizza joint on the edge of my small hometown. I delivered to everyone, and even several miles out into the more rural areas. Unfortunately, I hated delivering to people out in the sticks. I drove an old beater car. It had no power windows or air conditioning, and was held together by duct tape and hope. Every time I drove out of town on delivery, I worried about my car suddenly breaking down in the middle of nowhere. Thankfully, I went a long time before I ever had any issues. But eventually, the day came. I was traveling to a remote address with a large order. It was getting to be sundown, and as I got closer to the address, I started to become concerned. The GPS took me off the main highway and down a side street, then down a narrow canopied road that was labeled as a dead end. I'd never been down that way before. When I got all the way to where the dead end was, the GPS told me to go right, onto a dirt road. There wasn't even a sign naming the road, so I thought it was a long driveway. I went slowly for about a quarter mile down a bumpy, pothole-ridden mess as the sun set lower and lower. My car lights flickered a few times going over the bumps, making me wonder if I would even make it to my destination. However, I eventually entered a clearing where a single-trailer home stood, being slowly consumed by vines. The headlights of my car panned across the property as I parked, shining on a litter of black kittens which scattered and hid under a collapsing deck, their eyes glowing at me from underneath. The cats actually put me at ease. It meant that somebody was probably feeding them. But the tiny little trailer home with just one vehicle in front of it didn't look like it had the appetite for what I was delivering. All the same, I went up and knocked on the door. Nobody answered, but I could hear some commotion from inside. I yelled that their pizza was here, and then a few seconds later, I knocked again. That's when a makeshift eye slat in the door slid open. But it wasn't eyes that I was met with. It was a mouth, smiling from ear to unseen ear, bearing rotten teeth. I heard them take a deep whiff of the food I was holding and groan in excitement. Then they told me to just set it on the floor. I said they needed to pay. And what the person inside said next floored me. "You saw the cats, right? Just take one of them as payment." I was appalled. I told them there was no way I would accept that. Instead of responding, the eye slat slowly closed. I gave up and went back to my car. I sat down and set the food in the passenger seat. Then I called my boss. I told him what happened, but he told me to try again as it was probably a joke. I sighed and hung up. Then, I looked back at the trailer and saw 3 people walking toward the car. I briefly thought they had come out to pay, but then I saw through the darkness that each of them was wearing a makeshift mask over the top half of their faces. Then, I looked in my rearview mirror and saw 2 more coming from the woods behind my car. They were all smiling as wide as possible, sending fear through my body. I locked my door and decided to flee, but when I turned my key, my car wouldn't start. It didn't even make a noise. I slammed my fist against the dashboard in anger and screamed. The battery must have died or gotten disconnected on the bumpy road, but it could have been anything. I kept trying to start the engine as the people in masks approached me and surrounded my car. They looked in through the tiny slits in their masks, smiling. The one by the passenger door said to me that all they wanted was the food. Then, right next to me, another one had a kitten in their hands and told me I could still keep it. I shouted at them to go away, as there was no chance I was going to open my car for them. Suddenly, the one by the passenger door lifted a metal spike into the air, then slammed it through the window, shattering it into 1,000 pieces. I screamed in panic, but all he did was unlock the door from the inside and open it so he could grab the food. He took it a few feet away from the car and set it on the ground. Then the others rushed over to join him. The kitten was dropped on the ground and started meowing. All the masked people disappeared beneath the hood of the car. Knowing it was useless, I quietly got out and stood up. The image I saw next is something I'll never get out of my head. All 5 of them were on the ground, ravenously tearing apart the pizza and chewing it like animals. Just mouths without eyes or feelings. Terrifying. I picked up the kitten at my feet and ran down the road. I could barely see where I was going, and the cat was clawing into my chest, but I knew I had to get away from those horrible people. When I got back to the dead-end street, I stopped and called the police. I waited for them to come, holding onto the cat. When the cops arrived, I pointed them down the road to the trailer. They came back about 20 minutes later, saying they searched the place but found nothing except the litter of kittens in my broken-down car. All the evidence of the people squatting there and the food they stole from me was gone. To this day, I still don't know what was up with those people. At best, they were a bunch of creepy high schoolers doing some insane scheme for free food. Or at worst, it was some kind of weird cult thing. Either way, I lost my car and my job. The only positive I got out of the experience was my little black cat, Smile.
I was driving back from my friend's place in Wisconsin. I live right outside of Chicago, which is about a 6-hour drive, so I decided to do it all in one go. However, I didn't anticipate leaving so late. I wasn't on the road until 8 p.m., but I absolutely had to be home for work the following day, so there was no option to hang out any longer. If you aren't familiar with Wisconsin, it's mostly flat with a ton of forests all over the northern parts and small towns scattered throughout. The biggest cities are closer to the border, nowhere near where I was. My buddy's place was in one of these small towns, so pretty much right out of the gate, it was barren forest roads. There were a few cars here and there, but once I was 30 minutes out and the sun had set, there wasn't a single other car. I probably went a whole 2 hours without seeing anyone else on the road. The endless flat forest on either side of me was so repetitive that it was making me sleepy. It definitely didn't help that I was so tired from hanging with my friend all weekend either. I was trying everything to stay awake, but at just around 11 p.m., I actually saw something up the road. I opened my eyes a bit wider and could tell it was a person. They were standing on the shoulder and had their thumb out, clearly looking for a ride. For some reason, the very first thought that came through my mind was that having company in the car would surely help keep me awake. I almost instinctively began slowing down, and as I got closer, they started walking down the shoulder toward my car. I rolled the window down and pulled up next to them. "Hey, I just need a ride into the next town, if you've got a spare seat for me." It was really dark out, and I couldn't see much of him, but he sounded tired. I let him into the back seat. It wasn't until I started pulling away that the thought even popped into my head about why he was out here. I mean, the middle of the woods in the middle of the night was kind of a weird place to be. I looked in the mirror. The guy was looking at me through the shadow that covered the back seat. He looked like he was 30-ish, with stubble and a buzz cut, but I didn't see a backpack or anything with him. "So, what brought you out here?" he asked me. I told him I was at my friend's place for the weekend and was heading back home to Chicago. Then I asked him the same question. His straight face turned into a fake smile. "Oh, I was just walking on a trail in the woods and got lost along the way. Found the road and figured it best to catch a ride." I thought about his answer for a second. I didn't know about any trails or really anything at all in these parts of the woods, but even if there was, he would have had to drive to get here. Why didn't he mention that? Wouldn't he want me to take him to the trailhead instead of into town? I don't know. I was more awake and aware now, and it was making me uneasy the more I thought about it. But then the guy suddenly told me to stop. He told me to pull over and drop him off here. I cautiously did as he said, pulling the car onto the shoulder and parking. We were maybe 5 miles down the road from where I picked him up, and there was still nothing but dense forest all around. The guy quickly opened the door, and without saying anything, he started rushing away, heading for the trees. I was super weirded out and concerned about this whole thing, and at this point, I just wanted to get out of there. But he left the door open, and when I leaned into the back seat to shut it, I noticed a drawstring bag tucked under the passenger seat. It wasn't mine, it was definitely his. I called out for the guy, and he turned around. "Hey, you left your bag." He stood with a straight face and wide, frustrated eyes, staring at me for several uncomfortable seconds. Then he came back. "Your bag. You left it right here." I pointed under the seat, and he hesitated for another several seconds before grabbing it abruptly and turning around, hurrying back into the forest. I reached over and shut the door, then left the area as fast as I could. I was relieved to be away from that guy, knowing that something was definitely up with him. But it was only a few minutes down the road that I started to pick up on an awful odor from the back seat. It got increasingly worse over the next 30 minutes until I got into another small town. I stopped at a gas station and used my phone light to look into the back seat. On the carpet under the passenger seat, right where the drawstring bag had been sitting, there was a deep red stain. I almost threw up as I ran into the gas station and called the police. I gave them all the info I had on what happened, and they cut out the piece of carpet from my car to get tested. They also did a search for the man, but came up empty-handed, only finding a few footprints near the spot I picked him up at. I don't know exactly what was in that bag, but it seems like he was trying to plant it in my car as a means to cover something up. We still have no idea who he was or what he was up to that night.
My family has a cabin deep in the mountains that we enjoy traveling to every summer. It's surrounded by dense forest and nature, so it really feels like an escape from reality. To get to our cabin, we have to drive along a dirt road that winds through several other properties separated by wire fencing and a total of 5 locked gates. One summer several years ago, I brought my then fiancé with me for the first time. We all enjoyed a weekend full of hiking, fishing, and four-wheeling. On the day we were set to leave, my family packed up their belongings and decided to head out early in the morning. This wasn't out of the norm, as the drive out could feel a bit long, but my fiancé and I weren't ready to leave. We decided we prefer to have some alone time and prepared to leave later that evening. The day went great, and when evening came, we loaded our things into my truck, locked up the cabin, and started our drive back. By this time, the sun had gone down, and a sort of eerie darkness had crept in around us. Because it was going to be difficult to see, I drove slower than usual to avoid running off the road, or worse, hitting something I didn't expect to see in the road. The ride started off normally. As we approached each gate, I would get out and unlock it before driving my truck through. Once the truck was clear of the gate, I'd get out and lock it back up, then drive off to the next one. I preferred to do everything myself, letting my fiancé stay in the truck in case there were any bears nearby. Other than that, I didn't consider there to be any danger in being outside in the dark for just a few seconds at a time. But things changed when we reached the 4th gate. This change was in a fairly large clearing, making it easier to see the landscape reflected in the moonlight. The clearing, while more visible, almost made me feel less protected, like I was exposed to any potential threats. Despite this, I convinced myself there was nothing to be afraid of. I got out, unlocked the gate, and drove through it. However, when I went back to lock it, I noticed a small light about 50 yards up the fence line. I could tell the light was coming from a flashlight, and I could make out what seemed to be the figure of a man. I stopped for a moment and watched the figure, but nothing happened. The light and the man remained still. Shrugging it off as one of the other property owners, I let it be so I could close the gate and lock it up. When I turned back to walk around to the driver's side of the truck, I saw the light was now moving fiercely in all directions, and I could see this man was now racing toward us. He ran at a full sprint right along the fence to where we were. He wasn't shouting or making any other noise, just running. In the moment I spent being stunned and stupid, he closed half the distance. He got close enough that I could tell he was dressed in dark clothing and was carrying a backpack. There was no expression on his face at all. If anything, determination and nothing else. Finally kicking myself into panicked action, I jumped in my truck, put it in gear, and sped off. My fiancé, seeing the fear in my face, asked what was wrong. Realizing she hadn't seen whoever it was running towards us, I decided against worrying her and said I was just startled by something. She asked what it was, and I said it must have been one of the property owners out inspecting the fence. I knew she realized this didn't make any sense, given the fact it was so dark outside. But she accepted the response and went back to staring out the window. We drove about a quarter of a mile before arriving at the final gate. I put the truck in park and hesitated for a moment, looking back down the road from where I had seen the man. It seemed to drag on forever, but after confirming I couldn't see anything, I got out and walked towards the gate. I still felt uneasy. I was bathed in the light coming from my headlights, and there was nothing but darkness around me. I felt the same feeling of exposure, but again, I convinced myself there was nothing to be afraid of. I unlocked the lock and opened the gate. As I made my way back to the truck, I glanced down the road again. To my horror, I saw the same light in the distant darkness again. I knew it had to be the same person. The light was flailing around in all directions again, letting me know before I could even see the figure of the man that he was once again sprinting after us. This time, I conjured up the courage to yell and ask if he needed help, hoping the man would stop and respond. However, nothing changed. The man continued sprinting towards us. At this point, there were 1,000 alarm bells going off in my head. I jumped in the truck and sped off before he could get any closer, leaving the gate wide open. My fiancé, who can now see the man in the light, asked if we should stop and double check to make sure he was okay. I told her no. She then asked why we were leaving the gate open. I confessed that that light, that man, was the same person that had startled me earlier, and that he was running toward us then, just like he was running toward us now. Her face went white, and it was clear she understood that this man had been following us. I raced down the road, periodically glancing in the rearview mirror. Slowly, the light began to fade, and again we were surrounded in darkness. We eventually reached the canyon highway, turned off the dirt road, and headed for home. When we arrived later that night, I called my dad and told him what had happened. He said he had never seen anyone out that late before, especially like that. My dad then spoke to my uncle, who was heading up the next day, and asked him to keep an eye out for anything suspicious, but he didn't see or find anything. To this day, I have no idea who that man was or what his intentions were, but I'm glad we didn't stick around to find out.
This happened last summer and started pretty much a year ago. I am a guy who spends quite a lot of time in front of my computer, probably too much, and my room back at my parents' place has a window facing the road in front of the house. My computer is located next to the window, and when I'm sitting by it, I have that window to my right side. This means that if someone walks past the house, they can see me by the computer, and I often tend to look out the window whenever I see someone walking past, in the corner of my eye. No big deal. So this all started when I noticed a woman, somewhere near her 20s, maybe early 30s, walking by quite often, as in 5 to 10 times every day. No big deal, of course, she probably just lives nearby, I thought, which I later found out that she did. But this woman had a very uncomfortable look to her. It didn't look like she had a shower in a while, and she had this extreme smile to her face, constantly, as if someone had stapled her face into that expression. I didn't think much about it until I noticed that she started trying to make eye contact with me. Since she walked by my window so often, I often caught her in the corner of my eye and unintentionally looked at her. Every time she got eye contact, she would start giggling and laughing uncontrollably. This went on for a week or two. I just thought she was mentally ill or something, to be honest, and I didn't think much of it. But one day, she walked past an insane amount of times. At least 20 times in a couple of hours, and each time she was constantly looking in my window when walking by. This is when I started getting uncomfortable. After unintentionally getting eye contact again, I quickly turned my eyes to the computer again, only to see in the corner of my eye that she has stopped, standing outside my window and looking right at me, laughing uncontrollably with her creepy smile on her face. I quickly pull the curtains and I try to ignore it when I hear the doorbell. I open the door and there she is. I'm alone at home and I start to get some serious creeps. I was at the time babysitting my friend's poodle and picking it up to use it as some kind of protection. Stupid, I know. I say, "Hi," and she responds with a very, very happy hello. She then says, "Now it's your turn." I have no idea what she wants and I only respond with, "Okay." She then starts laughing, like a lot, as in she just heard the best joke of her entire life. I start panicking and I shut the door after quickly telling her to leave. I tell my parents when they come home, and it turns out that this woman is an old student of my mother. She says that she is mentally ill and that I shouldn't worry. She is supposedly nice. Her visits outside my window continue every day, and I tell my parents again that I feel uncomfortable. Then they try to talk to her to see what's up. My mom decides to ask her why she's doing this, and the woman tells her that her and I have some kind of supernatural connection in our heads, and that her and I have conversations with each other through some kind of telepathic way. We are made for each other and madly in love. That's when my parents are getting concerned. Her visits continue on a daily basis, and we visit the police to see what can be done. Their answer is that we can't do shit because of stupid laws in my country. She often rang my doorbell, but I had the sense to not answer. I noticed that as time went on, she got worse and worse mentally. She started to show aggressive behavior against my parents when they asked her to leave. I have actually never seen my dad so uncomfortable and overprotective as he was at this time. He was worried as well. One day, something happened that was enough for me. It was Friday night and I was home alone. I was watching TV and I heard a strange noise from the street. I peeked out the window and there she was, outside my window dancing and screaming and singing and doing all kinds of strange things. I put all the lights out in my house and I pretended not to be home, but I could still hear her. She was outside still. My neighbors ended up calling me several times, asking if I was okay, and I said I was, but I wasn't. I was scared. My parents were hours from coming home, and all I could do was watch TV, pretending not to be home. She stayed for an hour or two before leaving, and the week after, me and my parents decided to take action. We visited different mental hospitals, or whatever you call them, and tried to tell them what happened. But there was one problem. They didn't have her as a patient and couldn't help us. Neither could the police. To make the rest of the story short, it's been way too long already. This continued for the entire summer, and towards the end, she would often spy on our house, playing some sick game with a child that she had started hanging out with. At this point, she was kind of scared of us because she knew we had contacted the police and different doctors, and they were shouting things such as, "You see that house? Watch out for them, or they'll call the police." And she and the child would run and come back minutes later, repeating the same thing. The police have visited our block several times, hunting her when she is clearly out of control. There are so many incidents I can tell you about this story, but it would take way too long to tell everything. I don't live at home anymore, and I haven't been bothered by her since. Except the time that she tried to contact me on Facebook. I blocked her instantly. That was my summer of 2012. Not the best of my life. I'm 21 female, a college student, and I have been babysitting since I was 14. I'm not an expert on literally anything. However, over the years, I have learned caution and resilience. At age 15, I took babysitting classes at our youth center, as well as a female self-defense course. So I babysit at least once a month for this one family. I like them because they pay me more than my usual hourly rate. They have a big house with internet that I can use to do homework, and the two kids are surprisingly well behaved and compliant. So the two parents have like a monthly ritual of going out around 5 p.m. and returning a little later after 2 a.m. I'm always offered to sleep in the guest bedroom and stay until morning. I usually just stay awake and abuse our satellite TV and then leave when they come back. The house is in a nice neighborhood without a whole lot of neighbors. Very quiet. Also, their house is armed with an alarm system that I have the code to and can arm and disarm it through my phone. That'll be relevant in a little while. So I always take them for pizza at this place that has like an arcade. I do this so they tire themselves out and go to bed early. Plus the little girl that I babysit is also on a mission to win a family of stuffed animals from the prize store. So I'd be the world's worst babysitter if I didn't guide her in that pursuit. Anyhow, I'm rambling. I was sitting at a table and watching them play in the ball pit, while also texting on my phone. This couple came over and sat at the same table as me. It was a long table, with parents scattered here and there, so this wasn't alarming. The couple looked normal enough. Both were probably in their mid-20s, possibly a little older. They talked to each other, but then the guy asked me, "Are you the one babysitting Dr. So-and-so's kids?" The parents of these children are both doctors. In the specific region that we live in, this would be common enough information. But I still chose to answer their question with an irrelevant statement. "I wonder what they use to make the pizza here." Yeah, I know. Total master of deception. I deserve an Oscar for my performance. However, they seemed to see right through my clever ruse. They started making weird comments. They talked about the kids' parents. They commented on the daughter and how they wondered if she would look pretty as their mom. Oh, okay. I don't know if that was intended to be creepy, but I'm just going to be safe and pretend that it was. Then the woman says to me, and I quote, "Do they really let you dress like that while watching their kids?" She motioned with her eyes towards my t-shirt, which was admittedly a little tight, though aside from a little bit of a bosom crack, not revealing. I have a thin frame and a large chest. It's 90 degrees in my region in the US right now, so it's not like I can wear a hoodie. And my tits have a Crips and Bloods type relationship with any kind of shirt that has buttons. I saw that as my cue to go and get the kiddos and bring them to get their prizes so that we could bounce. After some very thought-provoking philosophical debating, they both got their prizes and we headed back over to the house. So fast forward a few hours. Both kids were bathed and put to sleep. I delivered a heartwarming rendition of Goodnight Moon and read a very spooky chapter of The Werewolf of Fever Swamp and tucked them into dreamland. It was around 9 p.m. I was caught up on homework and was just watching TV when I heard some movement on the porch. I didn't think much of it at first, but the doorknob started rattling violently. I initially started moving towards the front door to see who it was, but miraculously remembered that it was late at night. I was home alone with two kids, and I very much wanted to live. I turned around to grab my purse, which is where I keep my taser. As I'm moving, the back door starts rattling as well, and was accompanied by some banging noises. That's when I remembered that I hadn't enabled the alarm system after returning. Now, if this was a horror movie scenario, of course the alarm wouldn't have worked and the intruders would have made their way inside. I hate to disappoint if you were expecting something more exciting, but I enabled it quite easily with no incident. I ran upstairs and grabbed the 2 kids. I put them in their parents' room in the walk-in closet. I still hate that I scared them like this. When I gathered them up, I gave no context as to what was going on. I didn't want to tell them that someone was trying to break into the house, but in the process, the fear of not knowing seemed to be worse. I instructed them to stay in there and stay quiet, and only to open the door if they hear me talking to them. I then locked the bedroom door, which is the only door on the upstairs floor that locks. I sat there with my taser out and hit the panic button on the phone app. Several minutes went by, and then I got the notification through the app that the alarm system was disabled. I planned on calling 911 even though the panic button already took care of that, but I found it more beneficial to arm it back. Then it disarmed again, so I armed it again. Then it disarmed once again, so I armed it once more. By this time, I could hear what sounded like 2 sets of footsteps walking up the stairs. Good job, girl. I guess I locked myself with 2 potential assailants. I was holding it together for the sake of the kids, but not too deep inside. I was scared to death. When I heard the footsteps get near the door and saw the knob twisting, I took a deep breath and pulled the trigger on my taser, just to let them know that I was armed, though it realistically wouldn't do much good. I informed them through the door that the alarm was triggered and the police were on their way. Thankfully, I was greeted by a familiar voice. It was the parents of the kids I was babysitting. "You're safe," they said. I opened the door and ran into their arms and started sobbing. I hadn't realized truly until it was over just how scared I really was. The kids came out, without me giving them the okay, but their parents were there, so I'll let it slide. When I enabled the alarm on my phone, they both got the notification from the place they were at. With the app, you have the option to view the porch cameras as well. When they got the notification that the panic button was activated, they saw through the camera that there were people on each side of the house. 1 man, 1 woman. When the alarm kept disarming, that was them trying to get into the house. A police report was filed by them, and I gave a statement mentioning the 2 weirdos I met earlier that day. Even though there was really no evidence that would directly point to them, camera footage didn't give any positive face IDs either. So yeah, I was scared. I'm getting over it now. I'm just grateful that the couple that I was babysitting for were close enough to make it to me. I hate to say it, but I find the police response time to be terrible. I'm currently back in my own apartment an hour away. I checked in once to see how the kids were doing, and they're holding up fine. I'm just glad they had the proper protection in their home, and that this didn't end up to be any worse. This happened back when I was in 4th grade. It always stuck out to me as odd, but when I became an adult, it dawned on me just how dangerous it was. I had been invited to a friend's birthday party, which was to be held at a popular pizza joint that had a bunch of arcade games and stuff. This pizza place was right next door to a small movie theater, and the movie Titanic had just come out, so there was a decent amount of people in this part of the shopping center. My mom had to run some errands and to pick up one of my other brothers, so she dropped me off along the way. She said that she was going to stay until the others arrived for the party, but I knew she had a lot to do. The place was familiar to me, and I knew my friends were either already inside or would be there shortly. So I just told her to drop me off, and I went inside. My mom had also arranged a ride home for me from one of my friend's parents. No one had gotten there yet, so I had to look around at the different games, and then went outside the restaurant to wait for my friends to show up. There were a bunch of people outside the theater, lined up waiting to get inside for the early evening showing of Titanic. That's when I noticed that a couple, guy and girl, were standing by a car, smoking cigarettes and looking over at me. A chunk of time had passed, probably like 20 minutes, and I was super confused why my friends hadn't shown up yet. I knew for a fact that I was at the right place and that I had showed up at the right time. I was going over all the reasons why they might be late, when the cigarette-smoking couple came over to me and started talking to me. They asked me what or who I was waiting for. Obviously, at first, I was hesitant to talk to strangers, but they looked to be my oldest brother's age. Late teens, maybe early 20s. So I had been around older people, and I wasn't too bashful or shy around them, conversationally at least. I explained to them I was waiting for my friends to show up for a birthday party, but they hadn't shown up yet, and that they were pretty late. The couple made some other small talk. They told me they were waiting to see Titanic as well, but when they showed up, all the tickets had sold out for the showing they wanted, so they were just going to hang out until the next showing, which they had successfully gotten tickets for. After a little while longer of waiting and talking with this couple, they asked if I was hungry. I said I was, and they offered to buy me pizza. As a hungry kid who was seriously looking forward to pizza, but was unsure if the party was still going to happen, I wasn't about to pass it up. We went inside and ordered and sat down. I ended up hanging out with this couple for a long time. They were being super nice to me, even gave me money for the arcade games, bought me as much pizza and soda as I wanted. I had almost completely forgotten about my friends and the party that was supposed to happen, until I saw what time it was. Almost 2 hours had passed, and I started to get pretty nervous. I wasn't sure how I was going to get home. I didn't have a cell phone. This was in the 90s, and neither did my parents. My mom would be furious that A, no one showed up to the party, B, I didn't seek out help from the restaurant or some kind of security guard or police officer, and C, I'd spent the last 2 hours with strangers, accepting food and money from them. I decided to ask this couple what I should do. This is where things started to get really strange. The guy turned to me and said flatly, "You don't need to go home." Thinking back, I definitely couldn't fully comprehend the weight of what he said. I didn't know what to say, so I kind of shrugged in confusion and said that I needed to find a phone. I went up to the counter and asked if I could use their phone, and they let me. I called home, but no one answered. I tried again, still nothing. I then told the people at the counter that I was trying to get picked up, but no one was answering the phone at home. I must have looked pretty panicked because just then, the guy from the couple came over and put his hand over my shoulder and said, "Don't worry, we'll get this figured out." He then gave me some more money to play a few more arcade games, while he quote-unquote figured it out, with the guys behind the counter. No idea what they talked about specifically, but I ended up playing another game, and then I went back to the table we were at. The guy came back over and said they were going to take me home. He was being super positive and upbeat about it and was insisting that it was no problem whatsoever. His girlfriend was also being very insistent and supportive of the idea. Part of me was super hesitant because I was taught stranger danger and all of that. But the other part of me was wanting to believe it was all really innocent. And I was really grateful that these people had been so nice to me, fed me, and kept me entertained. They had even missed their movie to stay with me. I said that I wanted to try calling home a few more times. So over the next 15 to 20 minutes, I tried calling home a bunch, but there was still no answer. I decided that I would say yes to these people and have them take me home. Again, I was young, impressionable, naive, etc. The people behind the counter must have been seeing this from the more rational side and realized something seriously fishy was going on. One of them had gone on break and called the police to come over and address the situation. The policeman shows up and comes over to figure out what's going on. I don't remember everything about the conversation, but what it ended up coming down to was who was going to take me home. The couple was still really insistent. Thinking about this as an adult, I find it strange that the cop was even considering letting this whole thing be an option. As an adult, there's no question in my mind that the cop should have shut the conversation down and taken me home. But for some odd reason, they let me decide. I felt like I was being pressured. I remember going back and forth in my mind. These people had been so nice to me and had hung out with me, and I didn't want to be rude. I also felt intimidated by the police officer. I remember this part as if it were yesterday. As I was thinking, the cop went over to talk to some of the guys behind the counter, and while he was away, the guy from the couple looked at me with a smile and asked, "Do you want to go with him or us?" I told him I would go with them. Again, in hindsight, I still can't believe the cop let this happen. As we were getting our things to go, the officer did say that he was going to follow us the whole way, which was a redemptive assurance. The officer asked for my address and my parents' names. I got in the couple's car and told them where I lived, and we were on our way. The girl was driving and the guy was in the front passenger seat. The entire drive, the guy was looking over his shoulder out the back window, glancing back and forth between me and the cop following behind us. We pulled up to my house and I went up to the front door while both the couple and the cop were parked on the street. I opened the door, went inside, and saw that my mom was looking out the window with a very confused and concerned look on her face. She went outside and found out all that happened and was furious. I didn't tell her the specific things the couple had said to me. Again, I didn't understand the full gravity of the whole situation until years later. Going through the whole scenario in my head, if the cop hadn't followed us, I more than likely would have been abducted. Thinking about all the things that they had done and said, befriending me and feeding me and giving me money to play games, was them totally trying to come across as disarming and trusting and friendly. A totally fucked up situation that could have been so much worse. It's hard to think about. I'm almost 30 now and I have kids of my own. Thinking about them in this kind of situation makes my blood boil. I've posted this before as a reply to a comment. It's been playing on my mind because last week it came up in my time hop and I thought I'd share it with you guys. So last summer I booked a glamping trip in the next county over. The website looked beautiful. A campsite of 6 large yurts outside a lovely little village. Coincidentally, I had driven through that village before as it's close to a really nice historic castle I like to visit occasionally. So we pay our money and my husband and 2 kids and I pitch up. It's one of the last weekends of the summer and it was lovely weather. The campsite was on a small hill and the people who owned it lived on top of the hill in their farmhouse. We were checking in on a Sunday for 2 nights as we were shift workers at the time. We passed other people checking out and they all looked happy. The owners of this site showed us down to our yurt and mentioned that we were the only ones on the site for our stay at this time, it being a Sunday. We were happy with that, to be honest, because with 2 young kids it meant that they could make noise if they wanted and we would disturb nobody. When she showed us around, she didn't say the yurt door didn't lock, but none of them did, which was okay, I guess, because you don't lock a tent, right? The place was in its own mini wooded area and it was absolutely beautiful. The owner also mentioned the kids would be safe to wander because they had perimeter fences because of their dogs. The first night was fun. We had a barbecue and the kids played and went down to sleep at about 8. I found it hard to sleep, but I often do somewhere new. There was only patchy phone coverage, so we read until we fell asleep. Next morning, my husband seems a bit out of sorts, but I asked him if he was alright, and he says, "Yep, I'm fine." So I left it. We went out for the day and had a great time. The whole day was blazing hot, and then we got back. We were washing up after dinner, and the kids were playing, and a shadow came over the whole place. I felt eyes on me, and it went really cold. Honestly, it felt like something bad was going to happen. I felt dread hit me. We already paid to stay, but I pulled my husband to one side and said that we have to leave right now. I don't know why, I just got a horrible feeling. Please, let's just go home. Normally he'd try to talk me out of something like this, but he didn't. He started getting the kids together and I packed our stuff. We went to the farmhouse with the couple who owned it. We sat outside playing with their dogs. My husband started loading up the car, while I apologized to them and explained we needed to leave because our youngest was feeling ill. They said how sorry they were about it, and then just as I turned to leave, the man asked if my husband had been outside the house last night at about 3 or 4 in the morning. I said no, he hadn't left my side all night. I would have woken up and noticed. He asked me if I was sure. By this point, my husband was by my side and answered that no, he hadn't, and why. Well, says the guy, the security lights came on and the dog started barking, and when we looked outside, there was a man wandering around, who then turned around and walked back down the direction of the yurts. They assumed it was my husband. We both said it wasn't, and we said our goodbyes quickly. I tore out of that place in the car. Then about a quarter mile down the road, my husband turned to me and said, "You're right. I was quiet this morning. I didn't say anything because I thought you'd take the piss. I wanted to use the bathroom in the wee hours, but as I was about to get up, I heard footsteps on the decking outside. Not hooves of something on 4 legs, something on 2 legs. I laid there as quiet as possible and hoped the kids wouldn't wake up or something. It still freaks me out now."
I used to work at Target many years ago. At the time, they were still open 24/7, so I took the overnight shift as a stalker. I was a night owl in college, so that fit into my schedule the best. As much as Target gets rightfully criticized for being a terrible employer, I actually think it was a decent job for where I was in life. It's common knowledge how strange some of the people that come into the store are, but things are way worse in the middle of the night. Thankfully, I didn't have to interact with most of them, but there were occasions when I was hit on or harassed by crazy people. It didn't usually get that bad, but there was this one guy. He gave me the creeps. He was one of the main reasons I ended up quitting before I was finished with college. He came into the store on a freezing cold night in December, long after the hours when the store was still full of customers, when there was barely anyone there except for a few employees. I was crouched down stocking boxes of pasta when I noticed a man walk past the entrance to the aisle. A moment later, he reappeared at the end of the shelves, but he didn't walk into it just then. He stared at me instead. I could see it out of the corner of my eye, but I tried to ignore him. He lingered long enough for me to get a read on him from just a few glances. He was disheveled and dirty, not carrying anything, and a stench of stale feces and urine was already wafting over from him. Eventually, he started walking toward me. Once he was about 5 feet away, he stopped and stared down at me again. By then, the odor of his filth was overpowering. After a few unbearable seconds of silence, he finally opened his mouth and asked where he could find popcorn. I pointed it out to him and he walked away. But I noticed something weird as I watched him go out of the aisle. He had a strange limp as he walked, almost a waddle. Then, he reached back and scratched his crack, seemingly adjusting something inside his pants. Just before he walked out of sight, I confirmed there had to be something inside his pants. Whatever it was big, and it was sandwiched between his cheeks by his waistband. I didn't want to imagine what it could be, but I came up with a few possibilities before I successfully pushed it out of my mind. None of them were good. Thankfully, a few minutes later, I had already forgotten about it. I got back into my stocking flow and wasn't thinking about anything in particular. Just passively longing for the day when I could get out of this menial job and do something more interesting for a living. I was snapped out of my trance by the reappearance of the putrid man. Once again, he stood at the end of the aisle and stared. This time there was a slight smile on his face. He returned without any popcorn. I knew that out of everything in the store, the only thing he was interested in was me. He approached me again, stepping a bit closer than the previous encounter. The rank stench almost made me gag. I didn't want to look at him or even be around him, but he kept talking to me, trying to flirt. He said he couldn't help but come up and tell me how sexy I was, to which I replied with a simple thanks and a fake smile. He pressed me for information about where I lived, how old I was, if I had a boyfriend, all the typical stuff creeps feel entitled to ask about. I gave fake answers to everything, trying to give him every reason in the world to stop talking to me, but none of it worked. Eventually, he asked for my number, saying we should get together and make a baby with my beautiful genes. I declined outright at first, but after he asked me multiple times and made it clear that he wouldn't take no for an answer, I finally copped out and gave him a fake number. He walked away with a big grin on his face, as if he thought he had actually chatted me up and had a chance of getting in my pants behind whatever dumpster he lived behind. Once again, I noticed that weird limp and the impression of something big in his pants as he walked away, but I was no closer to figuring out what it was. After I finished unloading the cart, I took it to the back end of the store to get a full one. I needed a break after that guy, so I purposely stalled around by the door. Nobody was around to catch me slacking off. I figured I could stand there for about 5 whole minutes without anyone bothering me. Right as I was about to finally leave, the man busted through the door, screaming in my face and threatening to kill me for giving him a fake number. I jumped back in shock, hiding behind the boxes on the cart. The rotting creep asked me if I wanted to know what he did to people that lied to him. I didn't know what that meant, so of course I said no and asked him to calm down, but it had no effect. Then, right in front of my eyes, to my horror, he reached back and stuck his hand down his pants, about to grab something and take it out. I screamed and sprinted out the door. He tried to grab me as I passed him, but I escaped with just a scratch from his filthy fingernail. I ran out of the store and into my car. He was much slower than me and couldn't catch up, but as I pulled out of the parking lot, I looked back and saw him standing in front of the store, holding something I couldn't make out. I drove off and called the night manager to tell him what was happening. It took him a minute to understand why I wasn't coming back for the night, but he did call the cops to find the man. However, he wasn't there by the time they arrived. That scratch on my arm ended up getting infected badly and needed antibiotics. That just goes to show how disgusting he was. Yet, to this day, I still don't know what he was about to pull out of his pants, or whatever horrible experience I managed to escape from. I can only imagine the worst. Target was the worst place I ever worked at. But it isn't Target's fault. I had recently graduated from college and got a new apartment with an old friend of mine, but I couldn't find a job in my area of expertise in time, so I had to get a day job to make ends meet, and Target accepted my application. Of course, I quickly grew to despise working there. I couldn't relate to any of my coworkers. Most of them were generally lifeless and irritable people. Something about that place was soul-sucking. The customers were weird and often aggressive. The job itself was repetitive and menial, and the management was insufferable. In my short stint as a Target employee, I cashiered, stocked, cleaned, did customer service, and walked around as a general associate helping customers. Usually, the days I got to spend walking around were my favorite. However, the worst day I ever spent working at Target was the day when I happened to be walking around. Everything was fine for the first hour or so. I was actually having a somewhat pleasant shift. But then, my rare little rosy moment was incinerated by the sound of one voice. Someone behind me called my name. I recognized the voice like a shell-shocked soldier remembers the sound of artillery fire. I didn't even have to turn around to know who it was. It was my ex-girlfriend, Samantha. I'd broken up with her nearly a year ago. She was beautiful and amazing in bed, but everything else about her was a nightmare. She was diagnosed bipolar as a teenager, but had been refusing to take her prescribed medication ever since she started going to college. Her particular case was severe, though she refused to seek help. As a partner in a relationship, she was paranoid, controlling, jealous, and violent. I was never seriously hurt or traumatized by her, but once the force of nature compelling me to breed subsided, I realized I had made a grave mistake by getting with her. I broke things off, sparking several hellish months of repercussions. I blocked her on everything, but she incessantly found ways to contact me and find out where I would be to confront me, either begging for forgiveness and a chance to talk things through or screaming at me about how I was a horrible person. I continuously shut her down, and while things got dicey for a while, she eventually calmed down and seemed to finally disappear from my life. I hadn't seen her in months. I thought she was finally gone. In that moment, I heard her voice. My blood turned ice. She was standing right behind me. When I turned around, what was already an awful circumstance for me became the absolute worst-case scenario. There she was, grinning and staring me down with empty eyes as always. But instead of wearing a skimpy outfit like she used to do to keep me interested in her body, she was wearing work clothes and a vest, a Target vest. My heart sank to the floor. I couldn't even speak. But Samantha was giddy with excitement. She told me she had just gotten a job at Target, not knowing that I was working there, and had randomly been assigned to me for training. She said it must have been divine intervention, that it was a sign that we were meant to be together. I tried to open my mouth to disagree, but I was in shock. I could hardly fathom what was happening to me, much less form coherent words. What I wanted to say was, "What the hell are you doing here? Why can't you get it through your head that I never want to see you again in my life?" None of it came out. Samantha approached me, but I managed to back away. She pouted and refrained from coming any nearer, then sheepishly asked if we could be professional and do her training if I didn't want to talk about things. At a complete loss, I went along with it. I finally got my voice back and barely managed to start explaining things to her. We were all right for a few minutes while I kept my eye on her, bashfully smiling and trying to look cute and innocent, but I knew it was all a facade. As soon as I turned my back on her, she grabbed my arm. I immediately ripped her hand off of me and physically recoiled, looking at her with anger and disgust in my heart, just before briskly walking off to my manager's office. Samantha followed me inside. The manager looked up from his computer with confusion on his face. I wasted no time explaining to my boss that I refused to train Samantha on account of our negative history together. What he said in response made my face go numb. He told me he had never hired anyone named Samantha, and he had never seen the woman standing over my shoulder in his life. I looked back at Samantha in pure terror. She was smiling like I had never seen her smile before. It was half childish embarrassment at being caught doing something bad, and half the deep, twisted satisfaction of a truly evil person inflicting suffering on another person. I was once again unable to speak. My manager ordered Samantha to leave, and told her to stop impersonating a Target employee or he would have her arrested. He was polite enough to give me a few minutes to put myself back together before having me go back to work. The rest of the day was strange. I don't remember much of it. I spent most of it thinking about how scared I was of Samantha. Finally, at around 10 p.m., I was free to go home. I walked out into a dimly lit, mostly empty parking lot. My car was parked all the way at the back. I opened my car door and sat down. But before I could get my left foot inside, I felt a hand grab my leg, and then a searing pain sliding across my ankle. I looked down screaming and saw Samantha's hand grabbing my ankle with a knife in her other hand. She had sliced right across my Achilles tendon. I could literally see it in 2 pieces. Then she slid out from under the car, smiling, saying something I'll never forget. "You can't run from me now." But I did anyway. With my right foot, I stomped her head as hard as I could. She let go, giving me a chance to hobble back to the store while she was dazed and beg one of my coworkers to call the police. When the cops arrived, Samantha was gone, and I was taken to the hospital. Thankfully, she was arrested later and eventually sentenced to over a decade in prison. After many months' recovery and physical therapy, I could walk almost normally, but with a slight limp. Shortly before the end of my lease, I got a job offer in a different state. I took it in a heartbeat, knowing Samantha would never be able to find me again. When I was 15, I lived really close to a Target. My parents didn't have a lot of money, and I was able to walk there by myself, so that's where I bought most of my clothes. It was fun to go there with friends whenever they happened to be hanging out at my house, but I went shopping by myself a lot. My parents didn't approve of that, but I always thought what they didn't know wouldn't hurt them. If I had time after school before they got home from work, I liked to sneak a quick trip to Target. One day I had gotten out of school early, so I had almost 4 hours to myself. I blew off my homework and went straight to Target. I wore my headphones and listened to music. It felt good to block out all the noise of the world, and it helped to keep people from trying to talk to me while I was relaxing from the day. When I got to Target, the old greeter lady waved at me to say hi without talking to me. I thought it was funny that we had seen each other so many times, yet we had never once actually spoke. In fact, I recognized many of the employees at the store, and they might have recognized me too, but I never talked to any of them. I would say the normal hello and thank you through my headphones at checkout, but that was it. Going to Target alone wasn't a social experience. It was a time for me to shop and use whatever small amount of money I had to get a new top or a new pair of jeans. It was me time, but of course someone had to ruin it. I was at the shoe rack looking for a new pair of flats when I noticed a man on the other side of the rack trying to talk to me, waving his hand into view. He was short and chubby, maybe in his mid-30s, with a scraggly neckbeard and a receding hairline. I ignored him at first, hoping he would get the message and go away, but he persisted. I gave in and took out my headphones to ask him if he was talking to me. He said he was, and he wanted to point out that I looked a lot like his daughter. I didn't know how to respond. I couldn't even tell if it was supposed to be a compliment. After hesitating for a second, I finally just said thanks without giving him much positivity to go off of. Then I put my headphones back in and went back to what I was doing. That's when he had the nerve to reach over the rack and tap me on the shoulder. I took my headphones out again, making it quite clear that I was irritated with him, but he was smiling like we had just hit it off. Then he asked me how old I was. I replied with 14, sternly enough to make it an obvious reason to stop talking to me. It didn't take. His response was actually sickening. He said it was a wonderful age for a girl, but not so much for boys. As I was stunned for a moment, he went on to explain himself unprompted. A girl my age was at the cusp of womanhood but still had the innocence of a child. That's what he said. Before I could come up with anything to say, he asked me my name. I immediately gave him a fake name, Madeline, to which he literally swooned and gushed over how pretty of a name I had. I was starting to feel like my best possible defense was to give in to my nausea and throw up on him. The man kept pressing me for information about myself. He wanted to know where I lived, but I tried to convince him I was from a different state and just passing through on a trip with my family. When he asked to meet my mom and I couldn't prove she was there, he showed his true nature. He suddenly revealed that he had recognized me from before. He said he'd seen me in the store a few times, and I was always alone when he saw me. He thought I was lonely. He thought I could use a friend. My world was turned on its head. How many times had I believed I was alone, only for the truth to be that I was actually being watched and tracked by this creep? I couldn't take it anymore. I flat out ignored him and walked away, putting my headphones back in so I couldn't hear him. I made my way a few sections over and hid in the women's underwear area. I wasn't looking for underwear that day, but I thought it was the safest place to hide from that weirdo. I figured if somebody saw a guy lurking around racks and racks of women's underwear, they would definitely have a problem with it. I was trying to catch my breath and settle down. That creep had given me a nasty shock. My mind was running with all the consequences of knowing he'd been spying on me. I wasn't able to go back to this target ever again, certainly not alone. I hoped he hadn't followed me home and found where I lived. I wish I'd been more aware of my surroundings instead of sticking headphones in my ears all the time. Then, a hand cut my shoulder. I screamed, turning around to see the same creep standing in front of me, his other hand reaching out to touch my face. I shoved him away on instinct and sprinted away. I flagged down the nearest Target employee and told them I was being followed by a man I didn't know. They took me over to the manager's office, where they said I could stay until I got picked up, or if I wanted the manager to call the police for me. I opted to call my mom. I was already freaking out, and I didn't want the added pressure of a bunch of cops showing up and asking me questions. My mom was upset at me for going alone, but she promised to hold back on scolding me until I was safe. She left work early to pick me up and drop me off at home. For the rest of the day, I looked out my window, waiting for that disgusting creep to show up. Thankfully, he never did. In the summer of 2023, it was blazing hot in New York City. I had just finished my summer job, and as Labor Day weekend was right around the corner, I really wanted to go on one last vacation before I went back to college. I ultimately decided to go to a lake in the Adirondacks. It was much cooler up there, and I needed a break from the loud noises in the city. I came home on my last day at work and spent most of the night packing for my trip. I decided to book an Airbnb because it was much less expensive than the overpriced hotels. At 7 a.m. the next morning, I started the long drive to my destination. Around 5 p.m., I arrived at the Airbnb. I walked to the front door and rang the doorbell. I was greeted by an elderly couple, which I assumed to be the owners of the house. The woman introduced herself as Frances, and the husband introduced himself as Evan. They showed me around the house and took me to my room, which I would be sleeping in for the next 2 nights. I thanked them. They seemed really nice. As I closed the bedroom door, I noticed that it didn't have a lock on it. I found this a little strange because I was sure the other rooms had locks. However, It was a pretty old room with plenty of other quirks, so I didn't think too much of it. After settling in for a little while, I left to explore the town and get dinner. I came back to the house around 8:30 p.m. When I walked in, I didn't hear or see the couple anywhere. I saw their car parked in the driveway, so I assumed they were home and had gone to bed early. After locking the front door, I showered, got dressed in my pajamas, watched some TV, then read a book before going to bed around 10:30. I made sure the door was closed for privacy, even though I knew I couldn't lock it. The next morning, I woke up to see that the door was now open. And Frances, the old lady, was watching me from down the hallway. I asked her if she was okay. She was frozen for about 10 seconds, then finally mumbled something about checking on me to make sure I was okay. Then she walked off. I thought to myself that there might be something wrong with her. Why else would she watch me sleep and lie about it? Does she do this to all guests? Is her husband aware of her behavior? I found it to be very strange. It didn't seem right to me. And the fact that the door didn't have a lock made it seem like it was planned from the start. However, once I had breakfast and coffee, I forgot about the whole incident. I didn't want to dwell on it and spoil my vacation. I went to go swim and relax at a nearby beach for most of the day. I also took a drive around the large lake by the house. It was very beautiful, and I even considered getting a summer house up there one day. After a long day of being out, I got home around the same time as the previous night, but this time Evan and Frances were awake sitting on the couch. I waved and said hi to them, but neither of them said hi back. I found this weird, obviously, but while I stood there waiting for a response, I realized that they weren't just ignoring me. The TV was off, and they weren't doing anything except staring at a black screen. Their eyes were open, but it was like they were sleeping sitting up. It creeped me out, but I decided not to be around it, so I went about the rest of my night. As 11 o'clock hit, I was getting tired and decided to call it a night. Before going to sleep, I thought about what happened that morning. I was really hoping nothing like that would happen again, because I was really thinking that one or both of the hosts had some kind of dementia. What happened the next morning left me mentally scarred. It was something I never would have suspected in a million years. When I woke up, I felt something funny on my body. It took about 30 seconds for me to come to reality. I slowly realized that the covers had been pulled off my body and the bottoms of my pajamas weren't on anymore. What I saw next was worse than any sleep paralysis demon imaginable. Right in front of me on the bed, I saw the 70-year-old woman sitting on my legs. I let out a loud scream and pushed the woman off the bed. Then I ran out of the house, taking only my phone, wallet, and car keys. I left everything else behind. I got in the car and sped out of there without looking back. As I was driving, I called 911. I told them everything that had just happened while struggling to catch my breath. The operator told me to go to the nearest police station. When I arrived at the station, I was a mess, and I could barely speak properly. After talking with the police for about half an hour, they told me that they would investigate their house and question them, but they said they couldn't arrest the woman right away without any evidence. I thanked them for their time and drove all the way back home to the city. I got home around 4. After recovering and thinking about what had happened this morning, something finally hit me. The reason my door had no lock was so they could watch me sleep and do sickening things to me. The husband was either complicit and shut down whenever the woman was doing these things, or worse, he was involved, and I just never saw it. The whole thing was very disturbing. I wondered if the woman had done something like this to their other guests before. I decided to report the page and try to get it taken down, but as I looked for the place, I saw that it was no longer available. The woman must have taken it down herself. I never heard anything back from the police, and I never knew if they had arrested her or not. It's been almost a year now, and this incident pops up in my head every now and then. It makes me want to throw up. I haven't been to the Adirondacks again after what happened, and I don't plan on going back.